Okay. Hey, Manoj, are you there? Hello?
Hello, Tim, I'm here.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Good, good. You want to help with questions too? I can make you an organizer too if you want.
Kind of not prepared this session, actually, to do that.
Okay, okay. Well, we already have Susan Beal doing it. I usually like 1 or 2 people to do it, but that's okay. Maybe next
All right.
time.
Yeah, maybe next time, thanks.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's not like hard work, right? You just look at the question thing
No,
and
it's not hard work
transfer
at
the
all. And you just,
information.
Susan, you're not shy about, just jumping in if you need to. So perfect.
If you click on the link, it doesn't let you into the meeting.
It should, because the meeting's on now.
I know, I'm clicking on it. And it doesn't say, it says it's not, the link not present.
Do you want it in this view or do you want this view? Where you just see the slide that's on the screen? Yeah.
There, now you're in presenter view.
Okay.
Or slideshow view. I mean, we have a single
Oh,
slide.
in the previous view, you could see the notes too, right?
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
This is a single screen that says a case of aphorism 235.
Forward and back. Forward and back.
All right, well, once again, welcome everybody to this month's May Illinois Homeopathic Medical Association joint meeting with the Academy of Veterinary Homeopathics. And we have 2 really good speakers today. We're really fortunate to have Dr. Bill Shepard. He's going to be giving us a really good case, which has to do with aphorisms in the Organon. And then right after that, immediately following, we're going to be having Dr. Jody Bierman, and she's going to be giving some homeopathic veterinary cases. So without further ado, Dr. Joel Shepard.
So the purpose of the title was to get everyone to look at the Organon. Here's the case. It starts with a patient, which we'll call M, and the mom sends me an email. I guess we'll read it. So M contacted malaria in the Congo. He was treated with a bare bones treatment in the Congo, and he was medevaced to Dubai for treatment because it didn't work well enough. And she says it's an excellent hospital there. He received quinine in the Congo, and then he was treated with a drug named there, not available in the United States, a combination or dual therapy drug with artemisian in it. Excuse the misspelled words there. So he's going to be at home, which is in the suburb here of Chicago. And the specialist in Dubai is convinced that he's malaria free. They did slides of his blood, malaria antigen tests, blood cultures, all of them were negative before he was released. And the mom says that this was the strain of malaria that he probably had. And then she asks in the email, some people say that you never really get rid of malaria. Is this true? Okay, so people in the audience can give their opinion. But my email response was that he's not likely free of malaria. So we probably should use homeopathy when he gets sick and has symptoms when they resurface again. So why did I say that? First of all, I had experience of treating malaria when I was an intern at Cook County Hospital, and I saw cases that came in over and over again. My father-in-law had malaria from World War II, and he was treated over and over again allopathically, and it never totally went away. And we have in the Organon Hahnemann specifically saying that giving quinine does not, well, they stopped the intermittent marsh fever, as he called it, but they are deceived into believing that they are cured. Okay, so a little history on cinchona. Remember, that's the Peruvian bark that came from South America and was imported to the Europeans. And China sulfuricum, or as we would call it, quinine now, is the alkaloid extracted from the Peruvian bark in about 1820 or so. So Hahnemann wrote the 4th edition in 1824, the 5th edition in 1828. So by the time the 6th edition, he knew about the extract of quinine and the chemical name. All right. So a little backstory on this. Actually, it begins a couple months before he went to Africa. The mom emailed at that time that he was going to go to the Congo, and that the reason was that the National Geographic expedition was going to be heading out there to look for a living dinosaur in the middle of the Congo jungle because it had been reported by local tribes. So he went there, and she wanted to know how he could prevent him from getting malaria. So, in the modern tradition, we tried the no-sode made from the malaria 200 once weekly, I prescribed. All right, so that was a couple months before he went. Then 3 months after he had returned, he was sick. He'd been a healthy guy and was on no medicines. But with this episode, he was too sick to visit the office, so this was done on the phone. So his report on the phone, with the help of his mom, was that he had a fever. Fever in detail meant chills, followed by heat, followed by perspiration, and the sweat stage made him feel better. And this happened every few hours. It cycled. He has pain in the bones of his arms and legs as if they are broken. His low back feels like he's broken. He can't sleep due to the pain. His face is flushed. His throat aches more on the left. His eyes ache. He's not too hungry or thirsty. The covers are okay as he lies in bed. So, he wasn't very talkative and pretty sick. And this is the case that we had. So what did I do with the information? First of all, the symptoms that weren't too useful in the analysis of the case or the repertorization of the case is that the throat pain, the eye pain, and the appetite change and thirst change, I can see have hundreds of different remedies. It doesn't specify. If you put in the common or general rubrics too much, then you always get polycrest. So you have to, if you're a beginner, you should do all the symptoms at first, and then from that totality list, then you have to decide what's the important symptoms or the characteristic symptoms or the genius of the case from the totality. One point here is the word malaria is not in the repertory, in the old ones at least. And so where do you find it? It's under the chapter called Fever Intermittent. And even there's 208 remedies in my repertory version. And so there was a lot of remedies used for fevers. Remember, back in those days, it was mainly acute illnesses. Right? So the repertory is filled with references to acute symptoms. And malaria was prominent, not only in the southern parts of the world, but in Europe as well at certain seasons. So which symptoms from the repertory were used? So one of the most useful symptoms for these types of fevers is under the chapter fever succession. Normally, we wouldn't think of that in modern language. Look under the word succession. Alternating is not a good rubric. pretty general. It doesn't have a lot of sub-rubrics or specificities. So the rubric to use is succession of stages. And specifically, the way he described it is found in the repertory with 56 remedies. Better with perspiration, discoloration of the face, red, too many remedies, so I use flushes, sleeplessness from the pain, and then we have pain in the bones, and then we have pain as it's broken, and pain in the low back as it's broken. So a couple strategies here. Why did I use the word broken more than once? First, it's kind of unusual, right? It's a characteristic that you don't always hear. So it's a useful homeopathic symptom. So either you can underline, choose one of those rubrics that have the word broken in it and underline it 3 times, triple the intensity of it so it comes up in your repertory. Or in my case, I just repeated the variations of the symptoms from the various parts of the repertory to make them more prominent. So how does that end up when it, oops, I don't know what I hit. There it goes. So this is a summary of, in an acute case. And you can see how if we emphasize the broken bone sensation, that eupatorium will come up first. And as a note, when we talk about Lipe's experience, look at the remedies that follow closely, nux vomica, natmir, and I believe Lipe used arsenicum. You can see how prominent they are, even when we are very specific and picky about which rubrics we use. Right? So if you don't make a strategy like this by emphasizing the rare, strange, peculiar, characteristic, unusual, unique symptom, then you're always going to get polycrests.
Why is it not the other remedies?
So they were because of the word broken.
But all the other, most of the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 have broken, not as strong as eupatorium.
That's right, not as strong. So then what do? Do you take a remedy that doesn't come up very often and you see it in first place, or do you just go to the old standbys polycrest? So when we have an acute specific case, then you go for an acute remedy if it suddenly shows up when you don't normally see it in your repertoire.
I mean, what they used to do was he'd go through and he'd look at the remedy and say, well, sulfur, but it's not sulfur because it's not uncovering itself.
So
Chamomilla, does it have the irritability? No. Nature mirror, maybe some photophobia or something. I don't know.
right. So Lipe used Lux for malaria quite often. He used Natmir quite often for malaria, and he used arsenicum quite often for malaria. So they might have worked, but we have a remedy that's not common, but fits the specifics of the case. So, and then when you read about it, which we'll do in a minute here, then you see that it has a good history for treating intermittent fevers, whereas nux vomica can treat, too much alcohol, it can treat poison food. It has lots and lots of uses. It's not specific for this acute case. And you can say the same about the other remedies. Right? We don't have a history that he had intolerance to the sun for Natmir. It wasn't just particularly irritable, and he certainly didn't. He wanted cover, so sulfur isn't really there. And arsenicum, he wasn't restless, anxious, whatever. None of those things are available. So nothing, the polycrests are always going to come up. So unless it fits perfectly, then you look for a remedy in between, a different remedy. And here we have an obvious one. It comes up, it fits everything. And it's more specific. When you go to the Materia Medica, one more slide before we do that, and you'll see it. So look at the succession, fever succession, rubrics for it. I didn't put them all down. I ran out of space on the page, but look at the specificity. Look at how detailed each of those rubrics are written. And I didn't put it in the remedies that fit it. Just look at the possibilities here. So when you take a case, an acute case with fever, this is how detailed you have to be. And what's wrong with, in modern times, we can't do this. Right? People take, antipyretics, Tylenol or ibuprofen type drugs, or they take an antibiotic or an antiviral or whatever, and the symptom detail is gone. However, I'll make this point more than once. The standard treatments aren't working as well. What they call it, resistance or mutations of the bug are faster than they can treat it. So once again, we will have to get into the detail of how to do serious, life-threatening acute febrile illnesses. And we need this much detail to be able to learn how to do it effectively again. Okay, Materia Medica. Oh, first the follow-up. So what did I do? I gave you Butyrium 30C.
Before you go on, I have a question
Okay.
from the crowd, and this is a good time, I think. I know that the voice of the patient is important. You know, if they use words, specific words like broken, in this case, it's really significant. Manoj wonders, just generally, how common is bone pain in cases of clinical malaria?
Very common, but as it broken, narrows it down.
Thank
A
you.
lot of people have pain. Some people say it's in their joints. Some people say it's in their bones. Some people in their muscles. So that symptom of being in pain is common, but it's the broken part that's uncommon, relatively uncommon.
Thank you.
So what's available, right? That's why it's a 30C. I mean, if you'd been able to come in the office, I might have given them a 10M, watch them get better in hours, perhaps. But 30C is what the family had, and so 2 pellets every 1 hour. So this is pretty intense. So frequent repetitions of the remedy that was available, and then by the 3rd day, all the symptoms were gone, except some weakness and convalescence symptoms. And so he stopped the remedy, and now it's more than 3 years that he's not had a relapse.
With malaria, I wonder with infectious diseases like recurrent, like it's more susceptibility. So even maybe the miasm or chronic condition.
Sure.
How do you look at that in terms of this? Is it, you think,
Hahnemann
is it
says
chronic
that.
remedy or?
Yeah, so he's young and healthy, fortunately. So his miasm didn't prevent him from staying well. It's chronic disease predisposition. It don't happen with miasm, but his predisposition to have chronic disease or pre-existing disease wasn't strong in him, fortunately, and he didn't have it. But Hahnemann says that in paragraph 245. He says you will not get cures from epidemic febrile illnesses permanent unless you treat the underlying chronic disease weakness.
And you already been treating him. What was remedy?
So I only treated him once or twice as a kid. So I don't know. I think I brought the case, but it wasn't minor things, sore throat or an ear infection. So most of the time, even when the remedy looks nice and works nicely, in modern times, they're not going to stay well. Or they'll get over the fever and their chronic symptoms will kind of bubble up to the surface. Then you'll have to find the remedy that fits the whole person, the chronic remedy that treats the underlying chronic disease, what terms called miasm.
You treated this as an acute.
That's it, only as an acute. And it's right in front of you, it's intense. You don't use the symptoms like, did he crave sweets before he got the fever? Did he, did he sweat on his feet before he got the fever? You don't use those symptoms when you have such a new, intense, different set of symptoms, an acute illness. Why we don't see that so much? Because people are not well. They're chronically sick, and the acutes merge or meld together with the chronic symptoms, unless the epidemic disease is so strong that it has its own picture. That occasionally happens, but even with COVID, that didn't happen. I mean, we used a lot, but it wasn't the only one. There's a whole list of about 12 different remedies by good homeopaths across the world. There wasn't a epidemic remedy. Now, Hahnemann doesn't use the word genus epidemicus, but that's what the modern doctors tend to use that word. We didn't have one for COVID. We had remedies for different stages. The carboxy was used for the severe toward the end stage. But at the beginning, we used brownie a lot. But there was phosphorus, there was arsenicum, there was glycemic. We used lots of different remedies.
I think it's interesting when we look at fever from the veterinary perspective, and I've thought for a long time that to me is one of the most mysterious sections in the whole repertory, because it has all of these really marvelous symptoms and rubrics and subrubrics and stuff. And when we're working with animal patients, it's very difficult to identify those. I mean, you might get in a situation, where you've got an animal in an ICU where you're taking a temperature every hour, that sort of stuff. But a lot of times, twice a day, we might get a temp on them, for home care kind of things. And then we also tend to, I think, be totally oblivious to those things that the human side homeopaths who understand fever talk about. Like, fever is a whole series of events, not just, oh, the temperature is elevated above the normal range. And I really, it's been something that I've been kind of noodling on here in the last couple of years, but I think we don't use that that whole section of the repertory well as veterinary homeopaths.
So of course, there's no quantitative measurements in the chapter fever. We have intense in the word, but we don't have 99-degree fever to 100. It's the sensation of the patient. So how do you get sensations in animals? So, you'd have to see whether they want a warm place or a cold place,
Yep.
whether they're shivering, whether their tongue is whatever, their eyes, however you can do it. But if none of those are specific enough, then maybe we have to collaborate with people. So if an animal has malaria, then you're not going to get all the details of the fever episodes. Then we have to find out what's working in people with malaria and then try that on the animals. The homeopathic veterinarian that's often here in person, and when she presents cases, there are several remedies before she can find the right one. I don't think you're going to be able to escape that. And then until you find the remedy that works after you treat a group of animals, and then you can use it first on all the animals.
Yeah, totally.
In animals, I'm not going to see perspiration. Well, at least I know dogs don't perspire. Most animals don't perspire either, right? Either some.
Yeah, they.
Horses do.
Horses do, but like dogs and cats.
Yeah, but you'll actually see perspiration is an interesting rubric in veterinary medicine. Like, they will perspire, dogs and cats, for example, will perspire on their nose pads, their nose leathers, and on their foot pads. But we also have kind of extrapolated the use of the perspiration rubric in some of the skin coat, hair kinds of stuff, just in the same way that we take the head hair rubric and extrapolate that for like the whole furred being. The perspiration, like the perspiration greasy and the perspiration stinky and all of those kinds of things, even though a dog doesn't have the physiologic ability to perspire on his furry parts, that we do use that rubric. If we've got a skin and coat symptoms that might have smelly, oily, that kind of stuff, and there's the head hair oily and greasy, but perspiration could be a handy rubric to we found that it's been very reliable over the decades the larger we have been using it. And it's the same sort of thing, like the Menzies rubrics work really well when we use them in animals, even though physiologically a Menzies and a heat cycle are not the same thing, because of when ovulation occurs and all of that sort of thing. We still find that they're accurate, which totally amazes me still, but yeah.
Well, for instance, the avian flu going around in dairy herds in the cows, if you observe like 50 cows, maybe you'll be able to learn what the details are.
I actually did a I did a repertorization of those early symptoms when that first started, and and it came up with, I don't have that up, but it came like bryonia pulsatilla and phosphorus, I think, but remedies that would be easily differentiated in the field. And I haven't had access to any more clear conversation with any herdsmen in the affected herds, because everybody gets excited and they certainly don't want to talk to a homeopath. But I think we'd be able to treat that clinically.
That, right, it'll take, I think you'll have to make observations on lots of animals with a similar acute disease before you can draw a conclusion, and then have to try several choices. And if it works, then you can apply that to other animals, even if the symptoms aren't there.
I agree.
Yes.
So here's a kid who doesn't have chronic illness. 50% of kids have chronic illness now. Is this kid vaccinated?
No vaccinations, homeschool.
Find out.
11 kids
Whoa.
in the family.
That's-
All right.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes.
Just sort of prophylaxis for the malaria. It looks like the no-show is quite good. So, but have you heard of like here, or are there other options? Like you would do it again, or I don't know.
So I've not treated that many cases of malaria, but Napmir doesn't come up in modern times. So I would prophylactically try Eupatorium. And the malaria number, I would do both. Now, someone like Patulkas would say there's no such thing as prophylaxis because there's no symptoms. How can you use the law of similars if there's no symptoms?
Even Hyman did it, belladonna and stuff.
So he only did it after he found the specific remedy. Right? He treated scarlet fever and found out the belladonna worked. Then he applied it prophylactically. So that's what I'm saying with Eupatorium. So we found a case, so it's not enough of a sample here, but if we have to treat more cases and Eupatorium comes up more than once, then that would be the prophylactic. Well, you have to get experience.
I have a family because they're an alcoholic. Originally here and then she does something with the United States. So she takes her family to different parts of Africa where there is malaria. We can use Infamir rather than increasing potency once a month. If it's really bad malaria season, maybe once a week, starting at 30, 200, 1 m, 10 m, 50 m, occasional dose once a month or so. And they don't take, usually most people will need the diplomatic work, but melphaquinone, which is a fluoridated quinine derivative, which causes hallucination. A lot of people can't tolerate it.
So look how strong Napmir came up even when I tried to weigh it towards the Eupatorium. So it's Nux, Napmir, one of those top remedies could be prophylactic.
Your point is well taken. You always have to individualize. To have a routine prophylaxis work, but not always. It's always better to find the specific, or if you can, but you can't always do that. You do the best you can.
Well, this is one of the remedies that I had taught me before. So I kind of knew the remedy before we did this, because it's bone pain during fever. And the bone pain during fever is a good program. So you should do it with extended pain general fever during, and then it's extended pain with program. So I didn't see my pain in general during fever.
Well, I didn't get whether it was during the fever, during the chills, or during the sweat, or whether it was there all the time.
Was it, so people would say, well, when I get the fever, my bones hurt.
I didn't know to
That's
ask.
what it's, yeah,
I didn't know that.
because phosphorus has, extremely pain, it's a program, but it's not during fever.
Yeah, so phosphorus is pretty strong up there too.
And the other Eupatorium is it tends to have thirst, so he was thirstless.
Thirstless, let's take a look. Let's see what it says. This is from Roger Morrison's summary because it fit on the slide page easily. Where's another page here?
Oh, the previous one, it was right there.
Where I missed it.
Thirst for cold drinks.
What was the subject?
Paradoxical thirst for cold drinks. Chill or even river with paradoxical thirst for cold drinks. So they have they have thirst for cold drinks even during the chill. Interesting. But obviously that's not a acetoquinone symptom because we didn't have it during work. So.
Or I didn't ask.
If you have it, great. If you don't,
No, I didn't know to ask that either. So here's another, speaking to it, only working bone broken as if during the fever, there's a homeopath who uses it to relieve fractured bones. So both broken bones without fever as well.
oh, there, great thirst for cold drinks. Chill.
I'm curious, Joel, about just the case, what the patient, how in the patient's response to the repeated doses of the eupatorium and then the prolonged symptom-free period after that, and the reality that he would have had an underlying predisposition, his pre-existing chronic disease or whatever we're going to call it in this conversation. I'm just curious if he had other symptoms that might have been unrelated to this this acute exacerbation, the malarial suite of symptoms that actually shifted. Or you might not know that because you might not have the full anamnesis. But I'm just curious if anything else shifted or shifted that might make his the next prescription more start to show itself.
I never prescribed for him again.
Okay, that's all she wrote.
So I had to ask the mother, he's married and got a couple kids, moved. But so I had to ask the mother about the follow-up. So I have no chronic case on him.
Okay.
I'm sure there is in modern times. I don't think there's anyone without a chronic case. I think homeopaths look at it that way now. But no information, and the malaria episode was so intense that it didn't cross my mind to follow up with those symptoms because they didn't ask me to.
Thank you.
So here's an example of some materia medica. But, it sticks in the mind if you have a case rather than just reading like from a dictionary, the symptoms.
So the broken bones with fever, or with this malaria syndrome, that's the fever. Without that, if that wasn't there, that one word broken, if that wasn't there, it'd be hard to prescribe it. It wouldn't be so clear.
That's right. I tried to prescribe eupatorium for other influenzas, but without the broken symptom, it doesn't seem to do much.
It blows.
One thing in this case, he said.
That's right. He never had it before, and now they felt like they were broken.
It blows my mind. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say what symptoms he had in the Congo. I don't know how they were different. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it blows my mind when you take case notes verbatim and go back and look in not just the repertory, but more often in the materia medica, how, those 100-year plus old references will absolutely, the patient will absolutely say the very same words that are in either the proving descriptions or some of the materia medica descriptions and stuff, and just to over restate your point that this guy made all of those descriptions of broken bones and that sort of stuff, and it just amazes me, like words that you would never have thought that anybody would say before, and you go back and you read the old dead guys and it's like, oh yeah, that's just what Mr. Smith said about whatever. It's so sweet when that happens.
Yes, it is. But there are lots of modern homeopaths that kind of are saying what you were implying, that we need to update the language of the materia medica in the repertory. And that's probably true. For instance, when you look under pain, stitching pain. So I can't think of anyone in the last 5 years that's ever used the word stitching pain. But if you look at it in the repertory, it's the most common descriptive, qualitative descriptive word for pain. So what in the world happened? So in the old days, everyone made their own clothes, right? They fixed their own clothes, so they stitched, and so the word stitching was common. And what happens when you work with your hands? You injure yourself. So stitching was a common word because of the lifestyle, the culture of the times when repertory materia medica were made. Now we have cutting, sticking, not stitching, or poking, or all these different words that we have to, refer to the word stitching.
Even I never think of myself as all that old, but I guess I'm getting there. And when I was a younger person, even through high school and into university stuff, we'd say, oh, we have a stitch in our sides, or you get a stitch in your side running, and that again, I haven't ever heard that in a long time. Folks don't talk in those words.
I remember using that phrase as well, and it hasn't come to mind in years and years and years. Right?
Yeah.
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 I did have this exact symptom, as if the bones are broken, and my homeopath prescribed eupatorium for me when I was sick with a fever when I was in the tropics, and it worked immediately. And I also have, I'm also a human homeopath, and one of my clients used these words, but it wasn't with a fever, and I used one of the other very strong remedies. This person needed Theridion, and they're on it chronically, but they said they wanted to break their bones to let the energy out, break their long bone.
So Jody, have you ever had a broken bone before? Because that's the other thing that, like, just thinking about how people articulate their symptoms, and I'm not arguing about the sensation that this guy was describing at all, but it's interesting, like, oh yeah, like I broke my bone when I was X years old and this feels just like that, versus somebody who'd never had a fracture before that could clearly say it feels as though they're broken.
I have broken bones. I mean, I do work with horses, but my ankles both felt just broken, like I couldn't walk on them.
We don't hear it all the time. In humans, we don't hear that word as it's broken. People say, you think I broke my bone? They don't feel that it's broken oftentimes with fracture.
Right.
So if they don't say it, I tend to use symphytum routinely. But if they use the word broken, then I would consider maybe
You'd shift to the other pew, yeah.
Interesting you mentioned the modern home stuff on the same materials and the new words and stuff, which doesn't have explain it. But that was true in modernist time too. What they did, especially in England, Richard Hughes and some others, they tried to make pathologic-based material medica and purge like the mental emotions. Those weren't, they didn't indicate a disease. I didn't make a disease based. But the people in homeopathy who follow that path, they're successful with that.
That's right. So we still have the materialists who want to use pathology more, but in modern times in this country, we have the exact opposite. We have this symbolism types, the psychological archetypes. They want to reduce or generalize everything to archetypes, or some stereotypes, or whatever types, general types. So we have both extremes because individualizing is hard work. So throughout the history of homeopathy, they try ways to make it easier, to make it more routine. So you can have, if someone has rheumatoid arthritis, you only have a few choices. You don't have to start from ground zero with every case. People are pressed for time, people are pressed for income, people have responsibilities, people are busy. So that's always been true in homeopathy. And that's why there aren't too many homeopaths who stick with the organon. But as
So what does that say, Joel, about like the nature of man? Like that whole desire, like, oh, we got to make it bigger, better, more modern, when we have a yeah, sure, things are different in some
Well,
ways, but not.
I hope not everyone, or else we're not going to see homeopathy here.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
There's always those that take a different point of view. So that's, we have to figure out how to get along with the other 70% of homeopaths. Big problem. All right. So anything else on materia medica? Oh, just some more to botanical or, nature points. Here's what it looks like. Yeah. That's right. So this one is a little out of focus. Yeah, that's right. It's a little out of focus. Oh, and here is where it's found commonly in the United States. So this is kind of small. In this view, I can't enlarge it, I don't think. So let me read a couple things on description. There's usually, down here, you can go up to 160%. Oh, sorry. I'll just read.
Anyone know how to zoom in on GoToWebinar?
So when it's in a different mode, you can do it. When it's in the teaching, when you're constructing it mode.
Yeah, and for those people who are watching on this not in the room, there's a zoom thing at the very top of the page that will let you enlarge things as well.
Yeah. Okay, a little bit less. I want to read over here, and then I'll read over here. So there we go.
And then just,
All right, I'll see if I can.
then we'll go back and forth.
So description, a little bit there. What I wanted to read there was the lanceolate, opposite leaves growing 8 inches long, 2 inches across. And the leaves tend to grow together. It appears as if the central stem perforates the leaves, right? So that's where the perfoliatum word comes from. Oh, now I'm supposed to do this a little bit more botanically. Yeah, but you can see where it was used for anti-inflammatory. Medica has more different uses.
Yeah, I heard this is could be one of the genius academic stuff.
I've got a slide or two at the end for that. Yes. Okay, so here's the botanical. Now, if I'm gonna, let me go to the next slide to see if I need to make that bigger. No, I don't. So now I think I can stay in this mode if it's all right and just go to there. Is that too small? Yes.
And then click on this to go into presentation mode.
Oh, the little,
No, click
is
this.
that little thing?
Yeah, click.
Oh, okay. Because toward the end, I want to go back into that mode as well. Slideshow. Thank you. All right. So repertory, now organon. So the word malaria does not appear in the organon, but discussion of what were called intermittent fevers is found in paragraphs aphorisms 231 to 244. Right? When you read it, it says stop and start. Right? It looks like all the paragraphs run into each other, but it's not true. There are stop and start sections, and this one is specifically for the intermittent diseases, both febrile and not febrile. Hahnemann's words for this changing or alternating or diseases, you can see that German word, and specifically for the intermittent fever, that is for the changing fevers, you can see that word there, and the word for marsh, Sumpf. So they did not use the word malaria in Hahnemann's time, in Germany at least, and so they use it as marsh fever, or Hahnemann uses in paragraph 235, cold fever, kalte fever. But in English, the word was ague. The word that I don't hear anymore because we don't see malaria, but ague, why did in the world it have its own name for this particular fever? Let's go into a little bit more in a minute, but first, paragraph 235. So skip those top three little things. And 235, fever, febrile intermittent diseases or intermittent fevers. This is my translation, 235. There are innumerable variations of intermittent fevers. And then he gives some of the examples. Some of them, there's fevers and no sweat. Sometimes there's sweat and no heat or chill. Sometimes there's sweat only during the heat. Innumerable distinctions can be made about the other symptoms: headache, diarrhea, pain in the abdomen, before, during, after sleep symptoms. Each of these very different intermittent fevers quite naturally demand its own homeopathic treatment. This is the individualizing. So when you have all these different states, how do you choose the remedy? Which state? There are different pictures. Different stages have different pictures. Which state do you use? So Hahnemann says, select the remedy that produces each and all of these states in healthy provers. That's where we use the succession of fevers. Or the remedy corresponding homeopathically to the strongest and most characteristic peculiar marked states. That is, if you can't find a remedy specific to the description of the patient, use the strongest one, the most intense one, when they're the sickest. And the continuation here at the top, above all, select a remedy, if possible, during the feverless period. So their experience was that people got sick and they kind of recovered on their own, then they got sick again. So but during the so-called recovery phase, they're still having symptoms. Use those symptoms if you've got a case like that.
Just do it after the attack.
That's right, if possible. So you're talking about life-threatening attacks. So maybe, like my patient, he couldn't get to the doctor, right? So then you're talking to the patient in between the attacks. By the time you get there in their horse and buggy or walking or whatever, they're between attacks, then you use those symptoms also.
What about during the attack?
So during the attack, you don't have a choice because it obliterates all the other symptoms. Then you use the symptoms during the attack. And if you're there long enough and you see the heat phase and the chill phase, and which one do you use? Because they're different pictures. Because they're not thirsty at this phase, they're thirsty for cold in this phase. Which one do you use? You use the one that's most intense.
This is really cool because this is how Hahnemann came up with the whole idea of the law of similars, is by reading about symptomatology and malaria and realizing that malaria has many different forms, and that's why we use it. And that's what Hahnemann was like.
That's right. Right, that's the first proving, right?
And that's how we came up with the concept.
So we haven't hardly used the word China or cinchona, right, in modern malaria cases. We just don't see it periodic, as cleanly periodic as it used to be. So China isn't coming up so often. All right, then the next paragraphs, each epidemic of intermittent fever has a specific remedy. And then he talks how to use the medicines, right? Very specific instructions. So homeopaths didn't need to look at this in detail before, but pretty soon we're going to have to be very careful as the pandemics become more frequent.
What is this function? What is this one?
Organon,
I know that, but this version of it is,
6th edition.
okay,
The
the
book,
way it's written,
the book.
real good.
This is my
So I
translation.
have your translation. I
That's
was
right.
pretty-
This is, I photographed my book.
that's all I'm doing.
You'd be doing it, you'd be advising.
So you can, but in any of the translations, it might be one long glob of paragraphs, so it's harder to read. So I put it in more of a PowerPoint format to make it a little bit easier to read. But otherwise, I didn't change the word. Oh, I did it twice here. So language. So again, we have the old language versus the new language. Here are some of the words. and some of the different types of fevers too. What they used to call remittent fever is a fever that varies daily but never falls to normal. A relapsing fever is a fever with no fever periods, last 5 to 7 days. And it's 5 to 7 days without fever, and then the fever comes back. So those were old terms, right? Let's focus on a couple of these terms. Ague, a totally English word, not German or Italian or French. So ague was from the word acute. Ague, like sharp, acute fever. But the fevers of malaria were so intense and so strong that they got their own word. What about the word malaria? Malaria, for those who speak different languages, bad air. Malaria. So this is mainly from the Italian guy. So he started to use that word. That is, people who went to walk through swamps or marshes, they got sick. So they thought the sickness was in the bad air of the marsh or the swamp area. So that word came around, well, as early as 1840, really. But Hahnemann did not use that word. He used marsh fever or intermittent fever. But look at the word malaria, and the word miasm, which Hahnemann did use. So miasm from the Latin or Greek, meaning a pollutant or a stain, but it has more implications for like the whole being of a person, not the bad air. But malaria and miasm are both kind of similar terms for what people observed, what made people sick. Oh. So, courtesy of Dr. Fior, we have some words from Lippe, who successfully treated lots of malaria. So I'm going to magnify the next one, if you can do that. Or maybe it's big enough, and I'll just read it. You can say it's from Lippe. It's from in 1881 in one of the homeopathic journals. He's talking about his experience earlier on in his life. I kind of highlighted it there at the end, where he had an office in Pennsylvania, and there was an intermittent fever epidemic among the railroad laborers, and they came by the hundreds to see Lippe with malaria. And what did he do? He said the quinine eaters continued to suffer, the ones who took the standard treatment. And the ones that he came to, he rarely had to see them more than 2 or 3 times. They always received strict homeopathic treatment. The principal remedies were nux vomica or arsenicum and natmir. All remedies were given in the 30th potency. Sometimes other remedies. And he rarely, if ever, lost a patient. He did.
And gave like one dose. Like occasional dose here and there. But sometimes you put it in water, not in paper.
So with the way the world health is going, we're going to have to be as good as Lippe again one of these days. That's what it says. Oh, here's an old map, 18, I can't quite read it. I think it was 52. But in the 1800s, this was the darker areas where malaria or intermittent fevers or marsh fevers were found. You see where the blank areas with the more mountainous areas of the Appalachians are kind of blank. But all the rest of the eastern part of the country. 82.
1882.
No, 82. So then about the time Lippe was writing that article.
That's a good map because there's actually particle schools in Kirksville, Missouri. And the reason why they started the second school that I went to in Des Moines was because they thought it would be more healthy to get out of the swamp and such big malaria within Kirksville, Missouri. And that's why we have
Very good. So 1870, malaria in Kansas and Missouri. So there's a little extract from the book, Little House on the Prairie, and that little quote at the top there. And of course, in her endearing way of writing, Laura Ingalls Wilder, Ma called Pa and he came in. Charles, do look at the girls, she said. I do believe they are sick. Well, I don't feel any too well myself, said Pa. First I'm hot, then I'm cold, and I ache all over. Is that the way you feel, girls? Do your very bones ache? Right? 1870, Southern Kansas. All right. So let's not, I thought I had a second page where they talk about it. You can read it for yourself in Little House on the Prairie. They went through malaria in the whole area where in Kansas around the river there, and they all took bitter doses of quinine. And she complains of how bad it tasted and how sick they were, and that everyone in the area was sick at the same time. So then this is the guy who figured out that there were parasites from mosquitoes that made malaria. He got the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 1902. So there's a picture on the lower left of a parasite destroying red blood cells and the mosquito. Okay, so look how complicated the life cycle of this Plasmodium protozoa is. On the left, they're in the mosquito's gut, and then the mosquito's salivary glands, and then they go into the bloodstream, and they go into the lymph nodes, and then go into the liver, and they rupture the blood cells that go into the brain. It's a mess. How we figured that out, there's another one. Look how complicated these things are. That's why they can't treat it so successfully. That parasite mutates or has genetic variants. Whatever drug they throw at it, there's always a variant that's resistant to it. And then they grow and multiply and come back.
And they were using the tinctures.
Excuse me?
When they made tinctures.
Tincture.
Quinine,
It was a powder, and it was so bitter they would dissolve it and make a tincture out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I know because I then you were coming out to quote cure, like in this case, Victoria. But if somebody was doing a tincture, would that also cure?
So Hahnemann says no. It knocks it. How do you say? Kills a lot of the parasites. So therefore, the symptoms aren't expressed anymore. But there's always parasites that are left behind, and they remultiply, and the symptoms come back.
So it's a susceptibility.
Susceptibility. How susceptible are people? I don't know what we're saying.
Malaria.
That is, if 100 people are exposed to malaria mosquitoes, how many of them will get malaria? I don't know.
In certain parts of Africa, when you do malaria, it's like, no, nobody even get.
Almost everybody had it 3 times.
So,
When we're giving quinine, it's fine.
so this is with the help of Bill Gates Foundation mainly. They're trying to make vaccinations that approach different parts of the lifestyle, the life cycle of the Plasmodium. So how much malaria? 249 million malaria cases. 249 million. When we were talking about the pandemic of COVID, what were they talking about? 20 million? Something like that. Every year, 249 million. 608,000 deaths in 85 countries.
82 people.
Kids. 80% of the deaths are in children. And the big blue area is the African region. You can see over 400,000 per year, kids under 5. What do they do for malaria? Regular medicine. We've always used the nets. You can see that if more than 50% of the local population use the nets, then the deaths are decreased 20%. Children under 5. And DDT and other insecticides have never been outlawed in Asia or Africa continents. And it's just a lack of resources because you have to, dip the nets into that pesticide. Even now they use the pesticides and the nets nightly. And, in the years when Bill Gates first started working on malaria, there was no success for over 20 years. So you have pictures of former President Carter, former President the one before him. Anyway, Bill Gates got pictures of them going to Africa and handing out insecticide dipped nets, because that's all they had until recently. So here, for instance, in 2007, why did malaria make the cover? Because of Bill Gates. He was just starting in his foundation, investing more money than whole budgets of African countries who tried to approach malaria. So here is an example, another example of someone catching malaria. This is some male, middle-aged, supposedly healthy guy going to Africa from the United States for National Geographic, and look at his experience. Began suddenly, he was in his SUV, and stomach was bad, his head hurt, thought it would explode, body ached because he'd been trampled by a rhino. So he went to sit in his vehicle, and he couldn't even sit. He just fell out of the vehicle onto the ground. So they had a medicine kit, and they gave him tetracycline, a megadose, and he'd already been taking Fansidar and swallowed those. Oh, they gave him Fansidar. The fever broke at 2 in the morning. Less than 3 hours later, I slowly began to continue his journey. Everybody was drained, dehydrated, glad to be alive. How come he got malaria? He'd been taking chloroquine, paludrine, 2 anti-malarial drugs for months. My defense was literally full of holes. He's blaming it on the holes in his mosquito net. And but the drugs didn't work. And the mosquitoes had been, the parasites had been resistant to those 2 strong drugs, even in him. And then he goes on with this statistic. No one escapes the malaria. Now there are vaccinations. And this is from Wikipedia on April 24th. And the old one was, like by reference for 30%, the old vaccination. The first vaccination was about 30%. Now they've got a new one they're just starting to use, and they say it's 75% efficacy. Does that mean 75% of for the first 3 months, or the first 6 months? Because you have to repeat it over and over again. It costs money. You have to distribute them. You have to make sure that they're preserved. None of these facilities are widespread in lots of parts of Africa, but they're doing studies anyway because there's lots of money behind it. So this is going to be the first malaria vaccine program for children.
What kind of vaccine?
The second one,
Is it a
RTSS, they call it.
not an mRNA?
Not an mRNA. That's coming. Gates wants an mRNA one, but it's not there yet. So I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of vaccinations. There's not enough information. The independent information is lacking. We'll have to wait until there's more reports before we start talking about the downside of vaccinations or the good side if possible. Here's more detail if you want about the newest vaccination. This is from February 2024.
It seems the only one for efficacy in a very narrow way, and safety is never a concern. There really are no safety trials. None.
Nope.
And for the book, Triple Double Down is all about they don't do safety trials. They always compare one vaccine from other vaccines. How do you know that was safe? Well, compare it to another one. How do you know that was safe? Oh, we assumed it. And that's every vaccine. No comparison to efficacy. So let's compare against adjuvant or another vaccine.
So I'm not going to go into detail of trying to analyze vaccination yet. We need a lot more information. So is this all academic? Is it in other parts of the world? No, it's in the United States. For the first time in 20 years, the U.S. has recorded homegrown malaria cases. Usually there's a couple thousand, from travelers. But now we've got what they call endemic. That is, there's mosquitoes in the United States that are carrying the malaria bug. And this year there were 7 cases in Florida, 1 each in Texas and Maryland that could not be, connected with traveling, people who had been to some other country. So the malaria mosquitoes are here. And they say, don't panic. So it's coming. And what do homeopaths do about it? Well, they're not going to be able to say we can cure these strong diseases. Don't say that. But you can give some relief without claiming to cure, mitigate, prevent. You can't use those words. All you can do is support a person to try to make them healthier. So people can blame it on the changes in the weather, with climate change. We don't want to use that word too strongly. It's so political. Or people interacting so much more worldwide, bringing diseases from other parts of the world, bringing the bugs with them. Whatever analysis you want to make, people aren't as healthy anymore. Bad food, bad whatever. For all these reasons, we're going to have more epidemics, more tropical infectious diseases, for which regular medicine has not very effective treatments even now. So homeopaths are going to have to learn to become experts again, like Lipe, in treating these acute illnesses. That was what we talked about. So if we're having a person with fever and then it's gone and then it comes back, they're going to be still sick in between the fever episodes. And then that's when you use what we call the physical general. How hot are you? Do their feet get sweat? Or do they crave sweets? And,
Whatever.
those things. Then
But you include that in the picture, including the fever.
that's right.
And chill.
That's right. But if you see them during the intense fever, those symptoms are in the background or not there anymore. And you use the more characteristic symptoms of the intensity of the acute phase. But if you're seeing someone that goes through acute phase and then it gets better and acute, then you have to use their physical general.
Joel, can you address a question from the gallery here about the existing or the potential for global efforts by the homeopathic community to assist the public health folks in these affected regions? Whether there's, I mean, I'm quite confident there's individual efforts happening, but I wondered, about that interface and the larger perspective, and also that whole difficulty that, what we could bring to the table as homeopaths is not always in resonance with the way of thinking with the global public health people. That last part of the question is mine more than the one that Minaj asked.
Well, we could start with Liga. When the international homeopathic organizations tried to intervene with Ebola,
Yeah.
and they weren't allowed anywhere near. So
Yep.
even organized homeopaths with an organized effort weren't allowed to try homeopathy in those cases. So that gives a taste of what homeopaths are against. Second point is homeopaths are divided. There's no unity in homeopathy. So unless every homeopath is on the same page, there's not going to be enough, how do you want to say, political power, influence to allow homeopaths to do something organized on a large scale to help. Third, what happens in this country is if some very famous person gets cured by homeopathy, then it'll flood homeopathy, and homeopaths are not equipped for that either. There's not enough experienced homeopaths. So we have all those different problems. So in the near future, there doesn't seem a way out. To me, the best possibility is from the ground up. That is, we have organizations of what we call patients. People who've experienced homeopathy and organized themselves to influence politicians or healthcare officials. That, to me, is our best approach right now.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
See, he was pretty cool.
I'm sure, family mutual, and Peter Fisher was one of the Queen had like, a team of doctors. So he was one of the doctors. I'm sure someone else.
I read the name of the new homeopath for the royal family, but I can't remember.
Peter Fisher,
After Peter Fisher, yeah.
yeah,
But-
who got killed in a bike accident several years ago. Yeah,
By a lorry, as they say.
yes.
So,
Okay.
so one more point, someone mentioned the dengue fever, because I just treated my first case of dengue fever from a guy in Thailand. And what's happening? Dengue fever, there's over 3 million cases in Brazil, for instance, last year. 3 million cases. You see, it's coming. It might be in the hotter climates right now, but there's some dengue fever in the United States. I think I have a slide on that. Yeah. So there's a paper, Introduction and Spread of Dengue Fever Virus 3 in Florida. So it's already in Florida. Right. 61 locally acquired, which is endemic. I mean, the mosquito that carries the dengue viruses is in Florida. Right. And a case in Thailand, I gave eupatorium based on scant symptoms. He was so sick, hard to get any symptoms. And he said it helped a lot. That's all I've heard so far. Oh, by the way, he had weekend exhaustion after that, so I gave him Nux, and Nux is perking him up quite a bit. But I don't know if that's his chronic condition or part of dengue.
I think in there that we only have some. They have things to do there.
Well, my experience is it's useful to consider in dengue fever, and I had an indirect case of, what do they call it? Chikungunya. Also has pains as the bones are broken. And so it was a patient who had a relative in Mexico, and evidently the eupatorium helped that as well.
How would you, if this is a case of dengue, they don't say broken bones, how would you get there to where we make it?
Well, the bones as if they ache, even if they use just the bones, are so achy and they never had that before. And they're specific that it's the bones, not just ache all over phrase. Then I would consider eupatorium as well. That should be it. Oh. Of course, to get our, Hahnemann fix in here. And why do we keep going back to Hahnemann? Because there are so many variations in modern times from the original homeopathy. There's nothing wrong with improving homeopathy, but not if it loses its basic principles that make it effective. So people need, in my point of view, people need to know Hahnemann inside out before they start making improvements in homeopathy. Not just bring theories from other sciences and impose them on the homeopathic technique. All right, any other questions?
I have three, but I'm going to be one was about the presentation. There was a section about other research to consider doing there in that year, and there was something else. We don't even know I think it was the first one we were snap near was the last one. The next one.
Phosphorus is also we use several remedies.
Oh, okay. I was just like, it was like written on the top.
Oh, on the PowerPoint, we Nux, that year. Like occasionally in the next sentence of belladonna.
And then the other one, I was just curious if the things we were talking about cloud stuff, we said we just add eupatorium for formulation with their parents on your guys.
Parents, 11 kids, a lot of reading over the years.
Oh, just like, hey,
It might have been they picked it up in the office.
Okay. And my third question is just about you talking about the politics of the international people holding back by the other people that and make it exactly. But even like it's like why do they need to commit to this one and treat it I don't understand.
World Health Organization they're busy now that the World Health Organization declares an emergency. Every country has to follow it as well. It's over following the sovereignty. Victims that are going to be stronger than. So they always have that power to pull. Can't use anything in Nigeria. The Liberian government asked Rita to send homeopaths. And they got there and they had patients in the hospital. And the WHO people there said, you're not allowed to come in here. Yeah, you know, the government had said, yeah. So again, what he's saying is, they're saying, no, we're the experts on infectious disease. I don't care what the government says, we're sovereign over that. That's what, and where does the WHO get power from? China. China? No. China owns the WHO. And Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is Bill Gates. He's the one who mentioned vaccines. He is the biggest donor to the WHO. And he invests in vaccines. Why? He says I can get 10 to 1 return on my investment. And I invest in vaccines.
I'll have to ask you about it.
That's right.
So my personal opinion is, they don't want anybody outside, like meerkats outside. God forbid, they get better results in the treatment of these conditions, and then they have to report it. That the people that were treated in the operative, they were covered and they're not dying. Because I was saying there's all kinds of statistics of homeopathy versus the conventional medical care at the time. But the homeopathy far exceeded in terms of helping people in times of epidemic than with the conventional medical care. So if the World Health Organization gets in and they say, we're going to do this therapy, this, and anything else that we don't include it because they don't want anything else to be effective, even if what they choose to tell you that that group is going to do. If that's what they saw in hospitals with COVID and Investigator, when they took away things like ivermectin that were well trusted generic drugs because they didn't have any money. And the hospitals were biased towards whoever dictated to them that this is the treatment you have to use. And the attorneys, the attorney at that has been Longo or something, that they sued like almost hospital here. They had somebody in ICU like 2 weeks. This is more than 9 days. Where they don't get any results for this COVID person that they don't expect to live. And then you want to try ivermectin, and the hospital refused. They took it to court. And then maybe after the court, you just have to use it, they were refusing, they give you like $25,000 a day, and they finally let an outside doctor come in and administer it, and that person was released to the world. The covered miseries. So imagine if the lies they tell you become exposed.
This is very fairly ended up with a lot of, my mom and her siblings would sit down the table, talk about this is particularly, I mean, I don't know, but two people didn't think you control the world. And I was like, you guys are crazy. But now, like nowadays, you know, it's back. I don't think that people about it. But there's like people who are making lots of money.
The standard care is insulting. The standard care.
I think that was all good.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
Homeopathy became popular in this country because in the 1800s and early 1900s, that was epidemic disease diphtheria, scarlet fever, malaria, cholera, were just killing people. And the allopaths had death rates sometimes 50%. And people saw it. You went to a homeopath, you said that. And like we say, look at you, hundreds of cases a month, we have one death. I'm sure the allopath death rate is probably much higher than
There is a regional organization, I think, and it's just, if you let someone else be the brand for your organization, then they wouldn't get paid what the story is about you. And so I know because, I knew somebody who like started to see like Wikipedia. You know, you can edit Wikipedia, if they won't let you edit anything that's positive about, racial action. And so the reason for that is the people who are talking to the students that the judge decided like, oh, this is for opinion, so Wikipedia is all opinion, and the guy who owns Wikipedia was not liking to act nothing for some strange reason. So everything.
because the other guys pay more, that's why. Seriously. The idea of Wikipedia having an online encyclopedia that everyone contributes to is a great idea. But to monetize it, he basically sold out to the corporate interests. And they don't like naturopathic medicine. Because people who see naturopaths see stuff. And the drug industry is a $500 billion industry. So if you guys take money out of their pocket, they're not happy. So Wikipedia is a propaganda for them.
I see a lot of before. But the thing is, I'm saying is that it's not for us to accept them to write the true story about us and what we're doing. That's for us to do. And so, in addition to learning this and communicating it amongst ourselves, we have to be able to utilize those modern tools, have our own Wikipedia, or something that can be and like and put out information on the truth of things, you know, so that people in general around the world can know, and then add their voice to the concerns about what we're doing. But not if you just let the enemies, quote unquote, make the story up, they're going to be in the back for life. And it's not going to change some of the good.
You're exactly right, but you have to realize is in the 1800s, 1900s, the homeopaths organized first, 1844. Most homeopaths were, and medical doctors at that time, the standard of care was to bleed people and to give them mercury. You were poisoning people and getting them dehydrated, hypovolemia, and people were dying. That's how they treat people. The homeopaths were using, remedies and having great success. So most homeopaths were medical doctors who gave up professional medicine to do homeopathy. And they formed an organization, American Institute of Homeopathy, which exists today. They founded in 1844. The AMA was founded in 1846 with the express intent of getting rid of homeopathy. And they were very successful. Now the chiropractors sued the AMA and won. There was a 20-year case, went all the way to the Supreme Court, and to this day, as a result of Wilk versus AMA, look it up on Wikipedia, it actually has the right stuff. If anyone from the AMA says something negative about chiropractic, the lawyer for the ACA calls the AMA lawyer and says, hey, you guys did it again. Take that down. And the AMA lawyer goes, oops, okay, sorry, we'll take it down. But you see, that's what it takes. That's what it's like. There's so much money interested. To fight that is, the chiropractors could do it. It took 20 years. Went all the way to the Supreme Court. They won the Supreme Court. How much money did that take? Millions. Lawyers. I know the lawyer that they hired downtown Chicago. The dude is involved. He's got some $1 billion settlements and like product liability cases. How much do the lawyer cost? Millions. Yeah. Well, I like your ideas. But it's like quite a mountain to climb. We're talking about Mount Everest here. And there's a systematized prejudice in medicine that's been there for a century or more. That's what you're up against. I think you understand that.
I told Dr. Bodak.
It's not easy.
One time when I was doing a pre-med school, biology teacher, when went to school, she said, so she told me, whatever. And I was like, what? I was like, what's homeopathy one? She's like, and then I was like, and then also too, I was like, you know, you use it's like a bottle, well, I don't really know anything about it. But I was like, that was a pretty violent reaction, something you don't know. So immediately, I was like, I need to come out.
Prejudice is always based on ignorance. Prejudice is always based on ignorance. People who say, and I've talked to other doctors, specialists and stuff who, I mean, I'm a medical doctor, I talk to other medical doctors. And if I mention homeopathy, I've had them stop mid-sentence and walk away. And that, what is that based on? That based on knowledge? That's based on ignorance.
What I don't understand about the system is how they can educate people in medical school who have no intrinsic curiosity about other things. That the indoctrination is so complete that, I mean, how many times have you had, I'm not a suspect of chiropractor, that if I helped somebody get well, that couldn't get well, be treated by somebody else, that couldn't cause a way to do. Because they want to know for their own practice if their intentions are good of their patients. How many calls have you gotten from a physician that's treating another person that hasn't given you all that you want? What did you do? How do they whitewash people's brains to not have any curiosity?
Well, you said it's very logical. That's all you show people, that this is the only way to do things, so that's what you do.
Well, so.
Oh, and by the way, you're gonna make a heck of a lot of money. It's all that, you know, it's the allure.
Well, it's
almost everything. When you're little, you know, you have to learn to find a way in the path of, you know, the kids in the cohort. You know, some like give in, they follow the path. They do what other people stand out, and they have to do it that the rest of their lives, standing out and doing different. And so this is different from what the main thing is now currently doing in this country. And so they're going to feel threatened and they're going to back. So now we've got to build up the, you know what I'm saying, we've got to build up the brand, I guess, and make it so that we're not seen as being small, vulnerable.
Well, they have, I don't know, Dr. Buer, I'm asking if you know, if they, when they took a lawsuit with the chiropractic, didn't they use the Sherman Act to not have?
Antitrust, right.
An antitrust, it's Sherman Act, which is a law, which is an antitrust. Why can't we impose that today? That's what I don't understand, why it isn't, well, we're saying that seems like the only way to treat somebody is stay healthy. And why are we imposing, why are we trying to protect the naturopathic doctors, the homeopathic doctors? If we get harder, we don't consider a big Sherman.
Sure, but again, you take the case, you have to find a really good lawyer, and you have to have millions on.
Billions to work against the pharmaceutical industry. Makes it independent.
And
So
it's,
you don't do it that way, or do it later on, start on here.
Right.
We ran it in.
It was called.
I'm gonna do it later.
Yeah, well, I am really interested in seeing the truth of what's effective. And it's helpful for people to suffer, because I care about people. And I would think that should be the bottom line of all choices and treatments, but it's not.
It's not. A lot of people don't have to use that. Like that's your net.
That's your net. It's very interesting. How did we get here? J.D. Rockefeller. It used to be the naturopaths, the homeopaths, the eclectics. They were all, well, Flexner and Rockefeller. they were all vying for, like, no one had the dominant system in that. Then J.D. Rockefeller was a monopolist. People hated him. And what is a monopolist who's the first billionaire who was hated? What do? And this is exactly the playbook that Bill Gates is from. You start a philanthropy, you start giving away billions of dollars. And but you put a person in charge, and the person says, oh, the Altas are making drugs out of petroleum products. We're an oil company. And they don't ask any environmental, they're those testing natural hazards. That's about environmental toxicity, pollution, and we don't want that. So they invested what today would be billions of dollars in Altas. How do you compete with that? I mean, it'd be great if we could get something Elon Musk or something. But I need billionaire. Yeah, it's crazy, but genius because he's on the spectrum too. Isn't he?
I mean, that's like he's not.
But you need almost an infusion of cash like that to really to turn things. That turn things toward allocated medicine big time. And people, you go all these hospitals. Like I remember once I was talking to a medical student at the University of Chicago. We're going to talk about it. Beautiful, like 5-story atrium, beautiful thing. I'm like, this is a temple. You guys, these buildings are temples. Allocated medicine. It's like that's all their Rockefeller money. And temple. So there's a religion of medicine, really. And homeopaths aren't allowed in, which is sneaky.
You have everybody, like, even in school, like, when I was taking them into department classes, so that would be the first time. Done my degree
Stanford?
Yeah.
Cool. Stanford, yeah, wow.
But
Really?
I had to, take on competitive more. And I still remember like the like pretty large medical organizations. And they were attacking. No, wait, I think they were attacking me. Right? Because I had mentioned some, I don't know, something, what's her name? The blonde actress who's married to an insane, no, an infant maybe. She had
Jenny Carter.
Yeah, and so
She lives nearby. She lives in St. Charles.
and so I came up to she did like vaccine, and I was like, oh, okay, this is awesome. And that's pretty much all I said. And they like try to jump on me like a pack of Wolverines, about, I know a lot of people ask me, I told my friends, I'm fine with them doing the episode well, but I would say she made a choice not to do it because of what was going on and what it said, and then jumped on me, and I was like, this is these people, I was like, they don't even know what they're talking about. They've already been programmed to this degree that they will be, they're like really about it, and I'm just like, you are like crazy.
They're medical doctors or they're scientists?
They were pre-students. They were still like at the junior college level, trying to, but in the pre-med to go to med school. They're all going to medical school. Some of them ended up here in the Chicago area. But I was just like, it was like they were already like little puppets, they didn't really think, and they're all like younger than me. And so I was like, another generation thing, and I think part of it is like the younger little generation, because we use that social media and so forth, they don't really think individually anymore, and they just follow whatever.
They think in tweets. They think in tweets, little
blur
sound bites,
and
not dig into the material.
Yeah, one person told me now, we don't know how to figure out what, what real information is anymore. We used to interpret it, and but that's what the credibility and those that talk about. I can't speak about the best way to get home, but I can tell you how I was helping my little kid. I can tell you, I'm not an expert on it, but I can tell you a little bit. Like, you have to see, not everybody who's sitting in their basement is an expert or whatever. Not everybody, even if they're not sitting in the basement, they're sitting in one of the temple hospitals. They're not an expert in everything. Every single doctor is a doctor, regardless of what type of doctor. They don't know everything about everything. They know what they know about their specialty area. Period. But that does not mean that what they say about everything else is accurate and must be followed absolutely, like little folks, absolutely, I must follow what they say. To question everything, identify facts with the information, make your own judgment, and come to conclusions, which can be adjusted, but don't just take their word for it and operate on that basis. And so I think nowadays, people are more likely to look canceling people and more, they follow what the herd is saying for them to do, and they don't know why.
But it's not to be addressed nowadays. It is to do, I think it's something ingrained in the nature of human beings.
Yeah.
You want to be right, you want to be part of the group, you want to be protected, you want to be safe.
So most here,
Well, the worst thing in the world is to be ostracized for your religion. Until, you know, you learn to stand up on your own cognizance, on your own strength as individuals, to become part of the group. Look what the Nazis did. They were waiting to that, because people were afraid.
oh yeah,
So it wasn't, they weren't taking anything.
the youth now have youth.
Yeah, it's the,
If something happens to somebody. And that's when I think of, it's okay. That's when they start seeing folks. But
if they're lucky enough to have an right. Unfortunately. So I don't know that either, that's what I look for when I try to discern somebody's agenda. I look for something that is human,
Jody Berman.
that there's a humanistic and a caring aspect to what they're doing and what they're promoting, not a profit, but a humanistic and caring, because there is a lot of information in organizations, it's like, who are they, right up the mouth, and then I'll listen to them if I feel that, if that's just person, if I feel that they're.
Hey, Jody, are you there?
I am here.
Okay. So I gave the presenter over to you. You can show your screen.
I don't know how to do that.
Let me do it again. I'll send you like a,
Like this and open it like that?
yeah, just say open your screen.
Do I have to quit and reopen?
No, it may ask you which screen you want to share though, Jody.
It says later or quit and reopen. Maybe I have to quit and reopen?
You know, that's.
I may not be able to record the content of my screen until it is quit. You can choose to quit GoToMeeting now or do it on your own later.
Oh, no, you don't want to quit GoToMeeting.
Don't quit, go to meeting. You'll be kicked out of the room.
Okay. So
Doesn't it come, Tim, as a you're sharing the screen and then you have to accept the screen share at your end?
Yeah, I did. I asked to make her presenter. Here, let me take it back.
did that work?
Yeah, do it
I
again.
am
from
show.
the-
No,
Let me do it
Wait,
again.
I think it's working.
Let me show my
Here we
screen
are.
and I'll
Wait,
send it back
wait.
to you. I'm going to send it back
I
to
think
you,
it's
Jody.
working. I think I got it.
And you have to accept it and say, make your screen.
I did.
So
I think
waiting.
I did. Did that work?
Not yet.
It says it's waiting to view Jody Behrman's screen at the top of my Zoom window or go to meeting window.
I'm sorry. Can you try doing that one more time? I might have done it wrong.
Okay, let me take it back. I'll make myself show my screen.
Now
And
viewing
it
yours.
should be like a little, I'm going to say make Jody, and it should be like a little button that you click and say yes. Like a blue button.
Show. Yep, and it says show.
Yeah,
Yes.
show. Click on show.
Yes,
And I did that before.
there you are.
Right
We
now.
got
Got
your
it
full
now.
screen.
Now we got it. Now I see your screen. I see some beautiful mountains there and a mountain road and some sky.
Yeah, that's Okay, so here's my keynote. Okay, and view
And you want to view as a
slide,
slideshow.
A slideshow. Yeah, slideshow.
it's like play. There we go.
Yeah.
Oh, of course we're on the wrong one, so I have to go all the way back. Let's go.
And I'm going to ask Bob to come up and introduce you.
And then I just want to make the comment that there's no questions or comments about Joel's presentation, and I also want to make the comment about just how wonderful that whole presentation and discussion is, both
Here,
both
how
for the
about
clinical, both for the
that?
clinical stuff, but also for the larger philosophical stuff. I very much appreciate it.
Good point, Suzanne. Oh, and Dr. Shepherd, I just wanted to say that not only was that an outstanding presentation, but one of the really powerful things is that it's a 3-year follow-up. I mean, a lot of times, I have cases and sometimes I only give you like maybe 12 weeks follow-up because that's all I have. But I mean, 3 years is meaningful. So I applaud you. That's like awesome. So our next speaker, this is going to be really exciting. Dr. Jody Bierman. She's going to be speaking on what does calicarb look like in animals? Was that ever a great idea for a talk or what? Here we go. Thanks, Dr. Bierman.
Thank you. And I want a third that was an excellent presentation. And I think I had dengue when I was in Hawaii, and that's when I was treated with eupatorium. So worked like a charm with my broken bone feeling. Anyway, so that was fantastic. I'm not only talking about Cali, so I'm talking about another case first. My first case that I want to talk about is one that I'm writing up for our journal, and I wasn't able to talk about at our conference this past year. So not done with my article for the journal. It's mostly done, but not quite there yet. Anyway, this is a case of a dog named Bear who first came to see me when he was 4 years old. He's a Labrador retriever with central nuclear myopathy, which is like the central nuclear myopathy in humans. In dogs, there is only one gene implicated, but in humans, there are multiple genes implicated in this disease. In Labrador retrievers, it is a worldwide problem in Labradors with the same gene. And Bear came to see me a few years back when he was 4, and the people did not come to see me for central nuclear myopathy with him. They came to see me because he had skin problems, which, as all veterinary homeopaths know, this is the most common reason we see animals for anything in conventional or in allopathic or homeopathy or Chinese medicine or anything. It's really skin problems, especially in dogs. And so he came to see me because of his musty, itchy skin with dandruff. He was shaking his ears. He also had episodes of diarrhea, another common thing in dogs who've received any medications, of course. And you can see a picture of his tummy there, which is really red. It was hot to the touch. He's got a little discharge from his penis. He was neutered already. And this was back in 2020, so 4 years ago. Then he was a pretty stinky kind of dude, and quite stinky. And that's what the people were concerned about. They didn't even think anything of a central nuclear myopathy because they didn't think it was curable, because we are told this is an incurable disease. It's a genetic problem. There's nothing you can do about it. Once they get to a year, that's it. That's as far as they ever get. They never get better than that. So he was kyphotic, with a stilted gait. He had definitely trouble rising. He would rise off his front end first really slowly and then be able to walk. He could walk, when I first met him, up to 1/8 of a mile per day, but he would need to sit or lie down at least once per walk for a minute, and then he could get going again. Usually he'd have to sit or lie down multiple times. And he had generalized muscle atrophy. Here's a video of him. This is actually a more recent video of him getting some treats. He just goes to the treats. That was more recent, but you can see he's kind of stilted. And again, this is more recent where he's looking a little better. So like I was saying before, central nuclear myopathy in Labradors is genetic in Labrador retrievers worldwide. It's an autosomal recessive condition, and there's only one gene in Labradors, unlike humans. The signs can start to show anywhere between 6 weeks old and 5 months of age. And what it looks like is they're really, really weak. They can barely move. They have a stilted gait. They can even have worse issues than that. A lot of people put them to sleep, euthanized at that point, because there isn't a really great treatment in allopathic medicine. There isn't any treatment, in fact, and they never really get better. They can improve somewhat after their very young stage, but after a year, they say they never get better after that. So they can't walk much. They have, you can see here on his head, he certainly has myopathy there. I don't have great photos of the rest of his body, but his whole body was quite atrophied. It's called central nuclear myopathy because the nucleus is in the center of the muscle cells instead of at the edge. We don't know exactly how that works, how that causes the problem, but they have really, really weak musculature. And like I was saying before, there's Bear again, isn't he so cute? Humans can have multiple genes that can be affected, and they have the same thing with the muscle weakness and pain. And I could see that too on his exam. When I initially saw him, there was definitely pain because he had an elevated heart rate. Also because of the muscle problems, they can have respiratory difficulty, they can have scoliosis, and you could even see that in Bear initially too. He's quite kyphotic. And then there was a bit of a turn to that spine too. Laterally. In humans, they can also rarely have cardiomyopathy, neuropathy, and intellectual disability. These did not, well, it's hard to differentiate the neuropathy from the muscle weakness in a dog. He could have had extra tests done. He did go to the vet school, and that is where he was, not where he was diagnosed, but where he was told, the people were told to send in the cheek swab for central nuclear myopathy to Cornell. No, not Cornell. California Davis Genetics Lab. Anyway, so they were told to do that on their own, and so they did, and they sent it in, and he did come up positive, of course. But prior to sending in the cheek swab, he was examined at the UW-Madison Vet School Neurology Department. He was 8 months old, and he had a history of chronic collapse episodes. He had, prior to that, he had radiographs of his elbow, stifles, pelvis, and it showed some moderate elbow osteoarthritis. And that's pretty darn young to be seeing that at 8 months old. He had weakness of all 4 limbs. He was wheezing and a wet productive cough when he initially presented, and he was seen in their ER department, sent with some medicine for some antibiotics, I'm sure, for respiratory difficulty. And then he went back to the neurology department. And at his neurology appointment, they said after walking 30 feet, he would become stiff, rigid in the pelvic limbs, his head would extend, and he would fall. He would also collapse while sitting. And prior to the episodes of collapse, and this continued till when I saw him, he would often drool and his nose would run. Chinese medicine-wise, this is a qi deficiency. It just means it means that he's weak. But this is obviously something kind of important to think about when you're working up the case. He had multiple episodes per day of this stiffness, rigidity, and then falling, collapse. But he had no loss of consciousness. There was no seizure activity there. He did have ambulatory tetraparesis, a very stiff guy, difficulty rising on his pelvic limbs. When he was walking, his gait would slow, his tetraparesis would worsen, he would just get real stiff. And then he would collapse on his thoracic limbs, just fall right down with his head and neck out, and he would salivate and he would sit or fall. On his neurologic exam, his biceps, triceps, gastrocnemius, and patellar reflexes were all absent. Nothing there, nothing going on. So again, hard to differentiate that from a neuropathy. He was then, after he went to the vet school, and the testing was done at UC Davis, and they said he had central nuclear myopathy. They're like, well, nothing can be done. So they went ahead and neutered him, put him on carprofen. And then 2 years after that, they noticed that his ribs and his costal cartilage appeared shifted to the left. Radiographs showed fractured and bent left costal cartilage, but he had no trauma prior to that. And he wasn't uncomfortable at all. He was fine with deep palpation of that area. And this was at his regular vet, his previous vet, his allopathic vet. And here he is walking around again, just to show his movement. And again, this is a little bit more recently. But you can see his kind of strange stance on his hind limbs. His hind limbs are held cranial, more cranial than they would normally be in a Labrador Retriever. Okay, and then after that, he had positive Lyme antibodies on a test we call 4GX, so it's just checking for antibodies, and they put him on doxycycline for 30 days. And then 4 months later, when he went to his regular vet, they found a 3 out of 6 heart murmur, general stiffness, poor extensions of shoulders and hips. So he was not doing so great. And then I did his intake in 2020. And what I noticed is he's such a cutie. He was constantly dripping saliva, and this is what the client said, but I did see that also. He had eye discharge. He's a very slow eater, and this was on top of the skin problems that they really brought him in for, the skin problems and some diarrhea. And remember, he'd been on some antibiotics for a month. He was a very slow eater, which is a very unusual thing in a Labrador Retriever. They are quite well known for being fast eaters. Gobbling the food, you know, that canine appetite comes from Labrador Retrievers. And he was worse in very cold and very warm weather. He would need to sit and lie down more frequently. In fact, he would, get stuck out in the snow. So if he went out in the backyard when the snow was high, he would all of a sudden just get stuck and couldn't move, and they'd have to go carry him back in if it was really cold out. He would get worse with excitement. He would get so excited he would collapse. And he was really sensitive to emotional upset in his humans. If they were upset with each other, he would go to the other dogs to comfort them, and he was really affected. He liked to really likes to eat snow. He really likes very fresh cold water. He would drink other things, but he preferred fresh cold water, and drinks a lot at once, but not frequently. So he'd stand there for quite some time. And he loved to be picked up and held all the way along his human's body. So she'd be sitting in a chair and she'd pick him up, this big dog. I mean, he's like 60 some pounds, maybe close to 70, I think. Now he's gained a lot of muscle since then, but at first he was quite muscle atrophied. So he's probably 55 to 60 pounds. And she would pick him up, and he would want to lay along her body in a chair with his head up by her head and his whole body laying along her side, along her front. And he had this reeling, staggering, tottering gait. He had weakness with just a slight exertion. I mean, he'd walk just a little bit and like I was saying before, he would just fall over. And he certainly had development arrested. And here's a repertorization, and phosphoric acid on this repertorization came up number 1. That is the remedy I did start with. One of the reasons I did choose phosphoric acid for him was not necessarily that it came up first in this repertorization, because I did multiple repertorizations, but it was in some of the books that I read, it said very short activity, and they would need to rest for a short time, and then they could get back up. And he did only need to rest for a short time. He could get back up. And then he could only walk for a little short time, and then he'd have to rest a short time again and go. And as we know about phosphoric acid, they are worse with fatigue. All the acid remedies are just about weakness, and they can be, especially in this case, can be from loss of fluids. And remember, he drools a lot and his nose runs a lot, and especially right before he'd fall, there was a lot of loss of fluids. It's not as much as, like, I have a female dog patient that every time after her heat cycles, when she would bleed, she would collapse. But it wasn't until she lost quite a bit of blood, and then she would collapse, and she also needed phosphoric acid. But any kind of loss of fluids can lead to the collapse that we see in someone who needs phosphoric acid. They also tend to be worse with emotions, and phosphoric acid is pretty well known for showing the emotional effects first and then the physical effects. Now, in his case, we might not see that because he's born with this disease, but when he would get emotional, when the people would be emotional, like he'd be excited, or they'd be excited, or they'd be upset with each other, or they'd be upset with another one of the dogs, he would get worried and then he would collapse also. We also see it in children and young people who grow too rapidly, just like Phosphorus. And you could, I don't know if you could see in the videos, but a lot of early neuter animals, and he was not neutered early, so, but this is just how he looked. A lot of early neutered animals have strange bone growth, and they tend to have really long legs, like a lot taller than you would expect. And then they have more joint issues. And I know in Hahnemann's time, they weren't neutering any humans that he was working on, I hope. I don't think he worked on eunuchs, but we do see this a lot in dogs, and he looks like an early neuter lab, the way his body looks. And we see it with bone diseases and caries, that phosphoric acid is good for that. And he had that strange thing with the left side of his rib cage where it looked like some of the costal cartilage was fractured and it was sticking out, really abducted from the body. And also it was painless. I mean, I could palpate that. It was even palpated at the time that it was x-rayed by his allopathic vet, and it was painless even at that time. Emaciation, well, he had muscle atrophy because of his disease. Like I was saying before, with a short sleeper rest, it was pretty short. He could just sit down for, less than a minute and be able to get it back up again. I remember his original presentation was for this yucky skin problem. It was itchy, it was clammy, it was kind of like a damp, I don't know if you could tell by looking on that picture of his inguinal area, his lower abdomen, but it was damp and red, itchy, and so herpes dry or humid, so it was like flaky, and it felt humid to me. His whole body felt kind of humid to me. I know Susan was talking earlier today about using skin rubrics and perspiration rubrics. I didn't use that in his workup, but that would have been pretty good because he was kind of like, it was like sweaty all over, even though dogs don't actually sweat. They're just from their nose and their paw pads. And so I started him off with a dose of phosphoric acid 30C. And after his first dose, he was able to walk a quarter of a mile without any rest. Didn't have to sit down, didn't have to lay down, nothing. He just walked, and then he continued to improve. He continued to improve and improve and improve. It was amazing how far he could walk. They actually couldn't walk further than a couple miles because the person couldn't walk further than a couple miles. So, and also she had multiple dogs to walk. And his skin improved, which made her happy. That was the thing that she noticed first. She was pretty shocked by the fact that he could walk more. And he did have several doses of the phosphoric acid 30C through early 2021. And then I did get him up to 200C, but his slowness of eating did not improve. So he's still not a normal lab in that way. He's just still eating slowly. And I also do chiropractic in animals, and I didn't find anything in his head or his neck that was causing that. He just was slow. And then she told me as time went on that he humped one of his sister dogs, not a lab, but household sister, frequently. And he also, then she started mentioning that if he saw anybody outside, their neighbors, any dogs, any people walking, people on bikes, he could not leave. He had to see them. We think of this as being a fairly normal lab thing. They tend to be pretty outgoing dogs, but he's like, nope, he would put the brakes on. So even if, they'd been walking a mile and then they were coming home and their neighbors were out, he would just stop. He wouldn't fall, but he would just stop in their driveway, and he refused to move until he could actually see the neighbors. So because he was still the slow eater, and he was really, really showing this I need to see everybody, I have no boundaries personality, I thought we'd give Phosphorus a try. And Phosphorus personality is bubbly, extroverted, outgoing, loves company, open, trusting nature, likes to be magnetized, which is what veterinarians think of as a pretty typical Labrador. They also have debility and collapse. They also have left-sidedness. Remember that rib cage problem was on the left side. Tremendous thirst for cold drinks, and he really liked to eat snow, and he liked to drink cold, fresh water. They have stiff joints with little pain, sprains, easily dislocated like that costal cartilage, and caries of bones. And then the male has irresistible desire but impotent. Well, now he is neutered, so of course he's impotent, but he was still humping his sister. So everything about him fit phosphorus, so I did switch him over to phosphorus 30C. And then he started being able to go further and further. Oh, I'm sorry, he wasn't able to walk more than 2 miles prior to that. I think he was walking a mile, but then he started going 2 miles, and then again, the person couldn't walk any further than that. And he started to eat nearly normal Labrador speed. Now, normal Labrador speed is like gulp and the food's gone, but he was still pretty quick. Before that, he was taking 20 minutes or so to eat, and sometimes she'd even have to use her hand. Not that he didn't want to, but he just had trouble. And he started eating normal. Normal for a dog, maybe not quite normal for a Labrador, but pretty good. Still won't go unless he visits the neighbors if they're out. He just had to see them, and his skin was still really good. His stool was normal, so his diarrhea had all resolved. You can see in that picture, he's pretty drippy on his tongue still. It's a little bit dark for a tongue too. Well, it's a dark pink, which is not too unusual for a dog. Maybe a smidge darker than I'd like to see in a really healthy dog. And I'm sorry. So anyway, I just saw him this spring. He's doing great. I want to mention, the funny thing is I just saw his sister, not his actual sister, but his sister that lives in the house with him this past week or the week before. And they'd had her for 12 to 14 years already. And they got her when she was 2 to 4 years old. So quite an elderly dog, a Maltese mix. And they finally decided to bring her in for homeopathy because she didn't like anybody. She liked their family only, never like put her head up. It was always down, didn't want anyone to come near her. I think she'd bitten one person, but had really not bitten anyone since then, but they controlled the situation, but like super depressed. She'd been stray on the streets of Texas somewhere when they first got her and had had a litter of puppies. Anyway, she had orange stool, and that was the one thing that really stood out, is that Repatrise is not a ton of remedies in that rubric. And she got a dose of Nat Mirror, and immediately she brought her head up, looked me in the eye, and smiled, and went out smiling. It was pretty cool. I just wanted to mention that since we were talking about Bear. But he's doing great. It's incredible. So regular old remedy, nothing unusual there, but a condition that we are told cannot be helped. Was helped. So then I wanted to talk about, what does cali-carb look like in animals? I have 4 feline patients and 2 canine patients. And actually, you know what? I forgot a 3rd canine patient. So I have quite a few patients that have needed cali-carb. And those are my cats right there in the picture. My orange cat's on Russ Talks. He's great. It's the white cat who's sitting in front of me right now as I'm speaking. He is always right there. He wants to be involved in everything. Pretty nosy. And that's him. And so I want to talk about what they look like. I just love this little thing. I think on the top of that, it actually says that only, on that little meme, it says the only relationship we're staying, or something like that. And they show a cat biting somebody's hand. So cali-carb in a cat, a lot of people like to joke. There's lots of memes about it, about cats being jerks. And lots of cats can be kind of jerky. You know, they just do what they want. They're not actually being jerks. They just know what they want and they're going to get it. So cali-carb is like really that way. They are very black and white. They know what they want and they're going to get it, and they're just going to tell you all about it. They're right out there. So like when someone comes over to my house, my white cat is right at the door. Hello, what are you doing? And, you know, we had some work done in our kitchen, and he was right there the whole time. He doesn't try to get outside. He's just kind of watching them. He's not trying to tell them what to do. He just wants to know what's happening. They love their family, and so he's very lovey, especially to me. So they usually have someone that they love the most, for sure. But they're gonna, when they've had it with you, they're going to smack you, they're going to bite you, they're going to tell you. So one of the things they say in the materia medica is that they quarrel with their bread and butter. So they love their family, they care about their family, but they're also going to treat their family badly. So it's kind of like the whole cat meme stuff. But they also love their family and can be very loving and cuddly. So he is like, he's the best boy. He's looking at me right now. He's the best boy, and he wants to be loved and cuddled. He used to have me just carry him around all the time. And there I go and cough. And as you all know, calicarb is really big for respiratory problems. And they're really not bothered by strangers. So a lot of cats, scaredy cats, will run away. My other cat, my Russ Tux cat, Russ Tux is suspicious, mistrustful. You know, he goes and hides in the closet when somebody comes over. And even sometimes when my husband's walking by him, who he's lived with the whole time, but calicarb is not like that. They're like, hello, what are you doing here? And they're not afraid to tell you. So very much like humans who need this remedy. I only have one human on this remedy right now. I think so. And that human is very black and white, very upfront. There's always somebody in the family that is just wrong. And that's pretty much what they talk about. This dog here, her name is Kanga, and she is almost 17 years old. And it can be harder to see calicarb in a dog, I think, especially a very friendly, outgoing breed. Once again, we have a Labrador. Think of them as friendly and outgoing, and generally they really are. And she is. She's quite arthritic. She is at the household of the people who bred her, and she was at somebody else's household for a long time. And then when she started, I don't know exactly what happened, but they gave her back when she was like 9 or 10 years old. And she has just arthritic signs. She didn't really have anything else. She doesn't have respiratory disease. She has stinky breath, and Callies can have pretty stinky discharges. But there wasn't really anything that totally jumped out. You can see it more in the elderly, but you know, that's a pretty big rubric. There's a lot of remedies in there. The thing that finally, and I gave her a lot of different remedies over time, and yeah, there's some help, and I don't know. And then they were thinking, I don't know, she's just really having trouble, and it was especially her elbows. They told me that when she'd had puppies, she'd had a litter when she was younger. She'd had puppies. She was a fine mom, but when she was done with them at 8 weeks old, she was done with them. She wanted nothing to do with them anymore. When they came back to visit, because these people have a big place, and sometimes the progeny of their dogs would come to visit, she'd be like, no. And she wouldn't be nice about it. She'd like, rah, and pretty un-Labrador-like behavior. And they really told me a lot more, because I'm like, tell me more about who she is. Tell me more about who she is. I mean, I'd given her things like silicas because they said, oh, it seems like, you know, she thinks she's going to slip on the floor and break her bones like she's made out of glass. So, you know, I gave her that. I mean, she'd had a lot of things, but finally they told me this, and I'm like, it does fit in with calicarb. And they said now she is aging backwards. She's almost 17. She's just go, go, go. And she also was very needy. So when the people wouldn't be around, like even at night, if she decided to sleep in the living room and not in their bedroom, she would sometimes get up in the night, just bark, 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 demand, 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 you come in here with me. And they'd have to lay in there with her and pet her for her to go to sleep. And we don't really think of necessarily calicarb feeling that much that way. You know, it seems more like pulsatile or something, but it was more demanding, not whiny or like, I need you. You didn't get that feeling from her. It's more like, hey, you get in here. Okay, now you're here. Okay, now I can go to sleep. And can also be cat-like and a jerk to the family or some family members, while being very loving also. So one of the family members of that household who has the older dog, Kanga, just thinks she's all that. And I have to say, I feel that way about my cat too. And I just love that meme, biscuit making stops. Like, I love you, but don't you do that. Here's the other dog patient I thought of at the time. The quarrels with one's bread and butter with his family. This dog, oh my goodness, her name is Coco. She is a all brown schnauzer, and she came from a puppy mill. She was a breeder at a puppy mill. She was kept in a cage for quite some time. She had desire for company, but treated them outrageously, and especially the family. So I always ask, how do you feel? So this Coco, oh my gosh. Coco has a lot of personality. When she walks in a room, she's in the room. You know she's there. And she looks you right in the eye. Give me a treat. Give me a treat, you. And she loves her mom, and her mom just adores her to no end. Just adores her. But the dad of the household, she bosses him around like you wouldn't believe. And the whole thing about desire for company and treats them outrageously, in the evenings, she wants to sit in his lap, prefers him to the mom, who she adores, prefers him to the mom, yet when he comes home, she sounds vicious at him at the stairs. If he goes in or out of the back door to go outside, vicious at him, has even jumped up and bitten him, bites his clothes. I don't think she's ever really hurt him, but just like, what are you doing? Yeah, I'm really strong behavior problem. She does not have the respiratory problems either, although she does have GI problems, and they pretty much always have GI and or respiratory problems. Cali carb, as we know, they lots of times they have a feeling like something's in your throat, not as quite as much as the Cali Bic really can't get the stuff out of your throat, but the feeling in the throat, like can't swallow. Sometimes in dogs, what I see that, and cats too, is what I see is regurgitation, and especially after eating, like I can't get it down, and it can be water or food. But I did ask the clients how they feel, and the person just adores her, the woman who she adores, but the man is like, he loves her, but also like, she's so difficult. I also can't, I love her and I can't stand her, which is how she acts, right? Now I do see this remedy more in cats. And again, it's kind of cat-like. The behavior is what we kind of think of as cat-like. The regular things you think about with Cali Car are that they're chilly. This is Fiona, and she's a real jerk. I'll tell you a little more about Fiona, but they can have trouble swallowing. They can have difficult stools. So it is something to definitely be thinking about with those constipation, obstipation cats, and especially when they have these kind of attitudes. Asthma, wheezing, cough. My cat had like every Cali Carb symptom almost. Asthma, wheezing, cough. It can be wet or it can be dry, but it tends to be a little more wet. They startle with touch. And again, that's not terribly unusual for cats, but some cats, they just want to be petted. You think about your phosphorus cat, that's not going to be startling with touch, but you touch them and they just jump. A 2 to 4 a.m. aggravation. So people might tell you, you know what, they puke during the night. They puke during the night, they puke during the night. Before I get up, sometimes I hear it. Sometimes it's real loud, and they might tell you that it's 2 to 4 a.m. They have weakness. My personal cat definitely would get weak. When he'd get sick, he just gets so weak and depressed and go sit in a box somewhere, which is really unlike him. Definitely vomiting and regurgitation. They want to eat frequently. They're really hungry and they're demanding about it, and they might be a jerk about it. They might nip you in the ankle to get you to feed them faster, but then they always feel worse afterwards. They feel heavy and full. They might even have kind of a fluidy feeling in their belly with that. I would definitely be thinking about this in cats with pancreatitis, or what we used to call in cats. There was a period of time when we said triaditis, which is the IBD and pancreatitis and hepatic lipidosis that we would see in cats who didn't eat. This is definitely a good remedy in that case. And then an FLUTD. I think there's a new name right now, but it's feline lower urinary tract disease. So it's an idiopathic cystitis. It is a no growth of bacteria. Yeah, so if they do a cysto and they send it out for culture and nothing comes back, and of course they've already put them on amoxicillin or whatever else, this is something that is good in that case. And actually my cat had all of these things. Oh, it took me longer with my own cat, I tell you. You know, you can't see the forest for the trees with your own animals sometimes. Just too in love, I couldn't see anything. But I was going to tell you about Fiona, that boy, she's a jerk. She really is. So they have another household cat, Piper. Piper's on Natmere. And Fiona would attack Piper when Piper was in the litter box. And they have multiple litter boxes, but they're in kind of the same area of the house because of the way their house is set up. And Piper wouldn't let her out, or I mean, Fiona wouldn't let Piper out of the litter box. Thank goodness Piper is a Natmere cat, so she'll fight back. But, you know, it was bad. There were a lot of litter box issues, and that is a big problem in cats. I mean, you know, if they're afraid to go to the litter box, you are going to have urination in places you do not want, and that is a huge reason that cats are given up or euthanized. So be thinking about if one of them is a bully. This is one of your options for bully cats. These are usually not going to be the bullied cat. Now, I will tell you, my Rustox kitty will fight back somewhat with my Calicarb cat, but the Calicarb, he starts it. He always starts it. And he'll even like bite the back of his neck. Both my cats are neutered, but you know, do some of the humping behavior and bite the back of his neck. And I have to go separate them because my Rustox cat will cry, and I'm like, baby. This doesn't happen anymore now that he's on a 1M. Everybody's good, but prior to that, I had to go up in potency. I think Fiona here, I think she's on a 200C. She might need a 1M though. We'll see as time goes on. Oh, this is one of my favorite patients. Isn't she just so pretty? She's just so appealing. Which, again, this is kind of weird because I think in a lot of cases, like a Calicarb human might not be super appealing because they're so critical. But cats, they're just so appealing to us. You know, they're adorable. Anyway, she has an amputated leg. Her right front leg was amputated before they got her. When they got her from the Humane Society, it was fractured badly, and the Humane Society elected to amputate. Three-legged cats actually get adopted more easily. Same with three-legged dogs. People are like, oh, poor thing, and they tend to get adopted more easily too. So this is Juniper, and she is needy and whiny. And she has respiratory issues. She has a very high respiratory rate, and she has a little bit of a sound in the back of her throat. Oh, I forgot to say that about Kanga. So probably they have an elongated soft palate that's getting in the way a little bit. Sometimes people with dogs who make that sound, they'll say, oh, they purr. And Kangas, remember the black lab from the very beginning, that first slide, not Bear, the central nuclear myopathy, but the black lab who needed Calicarb. Her whole line of labs has this, they call it purring noise, which is probably an elongated soft palate and a weird little sound. It wasn't enough to cause a problem for her, but with Juniper here, that's probably part of what's going on with her. Cats do purr, so we do expect that, but it's a significant upper respiratory issue that is in her throat. But it wasn't like there was phlegm stuck or anything. It was hilarious because I went to her house for a house call once, and as soon as I walked in, she's like, hey, good to see you. And I'd seen her before at my office, but she really wanted me to see her in her home, and she led me to her pile of toys. And she took out every single one of her toys and showed me. I'm going to tell you all about it. Now, I did think of Lachesis with her because Lachesis also has like, you know, these are my things. This is my little dragon stash. These are the things that I love and they're special to me. But Lachesis probably doesn't want you to touch their things. No, these are mine. You don't touch them. But she wanted me to see these, and it was okay for me to touch them. And I didn't know the difference at the time. But she was like, look at me, listen to me. I'm going to tell you all about it. And I'm not shy about it. So her person would tell me, oh, she's just so needy and whiny. A lot of times when I'm on the computer, she's like, wow, touch me. And for some reason, so darn appealing. The person that they love the most is going to find them like unbelievably and probably incredibly attached. Her respiration, again, she's a cat. Vomiting is not normal in cats, but it's common. And her vomiting has pretty much stopped altogether. Yeah, and she's getting around really well with her 3 legs. She jumps up, no problem. She's right there. When I see her at the office, she just leaps right up onto the table. I use a massage table, and she just leaps right up there. Touch me, pet me, look at me, tell me how great I am. And they definitely want to hear that. And they do think pretty highly of themselves. They don't have any doubts that they deserve this attention. Here are my kids again. Yeah, I have a better photo of Jimmy on the stove. We got a new stove though. That's an induction, which you guys, it's the best thing in the world. Like I saved up for this for a really long time and I highly recommend it. But when we used to have an electric stove and we'd clean out the burners, he'd stick his body inside where the burners were. He'd put his front end in one and his back end in the other. Such severe lack of vital heat. The hugging the stove, all that. I tried all the remedies that are like in that rubric for him. And then they're so bold. So this stove has a lock that you can lock the controls on, and he knows how to undo it. You have to hold it for 3 seconds with your finger. He holds it for 3 seconds. And then he puts his 2 paws. You have to do 2 at the same time. I didn't even know we had this function on our stove, but to do this warming zone thing, and it warms his butt. Now, induction doesn't warm anything else except for the warming zone. It just keeps it warm. Everything else you need metal, but he's learned to turn on the warming zone and warm his own butt. So they're smart enough, and they're smart. They're right out there. They're really upfront. There's no 2 ways about it. They're going to do what they want. They're going to tell you about it. There's nothing, you know what's happening. My little GoToWebinar control panel is in the way of that bottom photo, so I can't really see what he's doing, but he's probably has a toy. And he is very grateful. So if I give him a treat when he wants a treat, or I give him, you know, a lot of loving when he wants a lot of loving, give him what he needs, he brings his toys to me. He loves these kickers. He's actually lined his basket with these 4 big kickers. I have a heated basket now for him, so he loves that. And highly recommend the heated cat bed, and he highly recommends it. And he'll bring me his kickers, but he's loud with it in his mouth, you know, really loud. So they'll tell you what they need, and they're loud about it, and there's no 2 buts about it. They just tell you. And I have to tell him, thank you so much. Thank you, Jimmy, for bringing me this. You are such a good provider. I'm so glad you take care of me. We take care of each other. And then he's good. But it's important that they know that. So it's a good thing to be able to say this to a cat who needs Cali Carb. I tell my clients, whatever it is about these particular remedy states, it's important to let them know. So Theo in that picture, that's an older picture before his eye was completely cleared up. But he's the Rustox, and Rustox is cheerful and joking and likes to play a lot. They play. He did not have the sprain strain kind of thing, so it wasn't quite as easy for me to figure out. And so I tell him, you're such a good player. You're so good at that, because that's what he loves to do. So they want to hear what it is that they want to feel good about. And so that's why Jimmy gets to hear what a good provider he is. And I just thought this was just the cutest meme ever. Oh no, we can't come out. We're busy. So if you want to get a hold of me, there's my email, and I would love to answer any questions you have.
Jody, it's interesting that Cali carb, I mean, that's going to be using more lately in humans, and the key symptom seems to be the 2 to 4 a.m., which like we noted in the cats too, or the animals, not the cats. Personality is a little harder. We talked about more dogmatic. Well, I guess that would be more of the black and white. Dogmatic, they don't like change. They're very set on the rules. They got to follow the rules. But that's maybe not as important as I found this at the 2 to 4 a.m. That's more critical for prescribing it. But it seems like a remedy when you first start out. It's a hard remedy to. I think if you read Kent's lectures on homeopathic materia medica, he talks about Cali carb as a remedy hard to perceive. So, but I applaud you. You gave us a really good picture in animals of Cali carb. It's a remedy that you don't see presented so much in cases and things like that. But it's a remedy that's needed quite often.
Definitely needed quite often. Yeah, and I was told from my mentor when I was in my human homeopathy school, when I had one of my cases, who I still see, one of my mentor's cases needed Cali carb, and I said, and she goes, "What do you see?" And I said, "I don't see anything. I don't even know what to think of this case." And she goes, "When you don't see anything, it's Cali carb." And I think it was because you didn't really get any feeling from them. I mean, the person had, some allergy problems, some respiratory problems. They're, not, well, they're actually that person is pretty muscular. They do exercise every day, but they're really, there's not a lot of, it didn't seem like a lot of depth. Like some of the remedy states that people are like so complicated, not in their disease process, but in their how they see the world. But this was so black and white. Like, this is wrong. And we grew up like this. And why doesn't my sibling see things? This isn't how we were taught. This isn't how we were raised. Kind of, I think of like a Midwestern farm person, and this person isn't, but well, you know what? Actually, they are sort of. Just from knowing a lot of Midwestern farm people being from the Midwest, it's just like, this is how it is. This is how we grew up. This is how you do it. And if you don't do it that way, you're wrong. And the cats and dogs I see like that do have strong feelings that way. You do this for me now. And yeah, there's not a lot else. I mean, there's a lot of love, and like, you're loved. And same with that. The people in the families like that, they know they're loved, and they love their families. They love their families a lot, but they're also like, this is how you do it. And if you don't do it like that, you're wrong. Is that how you see that in your patients?
Yeah, look for that. I mean, can't say I always see it in patients I prescribe Cali carb. Cali carb is it's also in the rubric in generalities, convalescent. So people who like had pneumonia or some other upper respiratory or cough, it's often a remedy that comes up. I can think of a case. I had a young mom talking to someone who had a tic disorder, and there's really nothing to the case, like you said, except his asthma was worse. As a kid, he had asthma and worse in the middle of the night, like 2 to 4. And he did great on Cali carb. His tics went away and he did really well. So yeah, it's like you say, yeah, it's hard to perceive. It's a bit hard to perceive. Yeah.
Yeah, it was sure hard for me to see it. I mean, I swear I gave this cat every every other remedy that says hugs the stove, and and they would sort of help, and then no. So he's doing great. He does still like his heated cat bed. He does still, and all of my all of my, well, you know what though? I don't see that so much in the dogs. I mean, they don't, they'll go out and play in the snow, but maybe they don't want to stay out in it. Or if it's really cold and rainy, they don't want to stay out in it. Um, that's a little harder to see in a dog because dogs want to be outside and they want to do stuff. They want to do stuff with their family, and people are like, well, they want to be where I am. Well, yeah. I mean, that's kind of the state of a dog generally. So it way too. And usually people don't give their dogs heated dog beds.
Did the,
So yeah, it's kind of tricky.
Did the white cat stops after Cali Carp stops trying to lay on the stove? Did that change?
He still will, but it used to be that his fur was always up on his back, and that has gone way down. Really, it wasn't until he got 1M a couple times. I mean, I started him off at 30C because of his asthma, and like I think it was, I could be wrong, but it seems like Kent said to go slowly down, but it might have been Kent quoting Hahnemann saying, go really slowly when you have asthma. And because, or, with any lung disease, you want to be really careful and go slowly. Don't go up fast. So I did that with him, and his GI problems were just getting worse and worse. Well, in his severity of his GI problems, the signs were stronger. And so, but then once I finally hit 1M, he has coughed a few times since he's been on 1M. He's had 1M a few times, and he has coughed a few times, but the episodes are much shorter. He doesn't seem distressed. He's eating really well, and that is fantastic. He had gotten to the point where he wouldn't eat, and with cats, you can't do that. You can't have that. I mean, you really can't have them not eat for more than a day or so, because then they end up with pancreatic problems, and cats are very sensitive that way. So yeah, he's still wanting warmth. He still lays in his warm cat bed. We don't have that old stove anymore. We have the other one, but he still goes up there. Do you know what? He hasn't turned on the warming zone in a couple months at least. So, and he knows how, sadly enough. So, yeah, I think that is better. And he's not a jerk. He hasn't bitten my husband in a really long time. He would only bite when we weren't feeding him fast enough, and he would bite your ankle. He never bit my ankle, but he would smack his brother. They would stand up and do the standing up little battling of paws business, and that hasn't really been happening either. He's just so much better. And even another weird thing, and I don't remember if this is in the Materia Medica for Cali Carb or not, but he would crave the weirdest food. He craved tofu and cabbage. And these are foods that I eat, and he would try to rip them out of my hands, rip them off my plate. And now he just sits and watches me and doesn't try to eat my food, which is really nice. Cali Carb is known for doing well on more of a bland kind of diet. Again, they're kind of black and white, and they like kind of more plain things. And so he just eats mostly plain chicken, cat food. But he's able now to eat raw food again, which he wasn't. He just couldn't handle it. He needed just a really bland, and that's typical of cats in a state too. Dogs, I mean, I think that the little brown dog, Coco, the one who was, oh my goodness, so much attitude. She had to go on a bland diet for a while too, before we switched to Cali Carb. I can't even remember where I started her, but it wasn't Cali Carb. I think it might have been Nux. She seems very Nuxy, and my cats had Nux too, and it can look a lot like Nux, right? Because they're really bold, they're really cold. They'll tell you what they think is wrong. They have a lot to say about anything. They're right out there. So I think a good differentiation would be with Nux. They seem very Nuxy. Lots of GI problems. maybe more respiratory problems than NUCs, although NUCs can certainly have that too. And they can certainly have constipation, obstipation, which you can have with NUCs too. So they can be very NUCs-like. And that is a hard one to differentiate. So, I mean, the repetitorization is going to help, but you might be trying a couple different things. What could I say is really different? That's a hard one. Personality-wise, I don't know that I could really differentiate those two.
Well, I could say a couple things.
And
Clinically,
NUCs will have so many GI problems, it can look like something. Yeah, go ahead.
so in people in clinical situations where I think of calicarb, one is the resolution phase of pneumonia after browning and phosphorus. The calicarb doesn't want the cold drinks, they want them warmer, they like sweets, they have the constipation and the trouble with the difficulty with mucus. But still, I look for the aggravation in the middle of the night for that big part.
Right.
Another situation is postpartum, when there's low back pain that from a difficult delivery, and the low back pain is a result of childbirth, or pain that goes to the left, sciatic, in such a situation, or the left hip, along with the constipation. Is another situation I look for. Another one is when they have very intense or strong anxiety in the pit of the stomach. One of the few remedies listed there, which is there and a couple others. Calicarb has anxiety in the stomach in people and apprehension, which I take is stronger than anxiety in the pit of the stomach. So they're anxious people as well as they need to follow all the rules. We used to ask the question, if all the parking spaces in our lot were taken except the one for handicaps, would you park there? Well, Calicarb would never do that, even if they had to walk in a long distance. So they make their own set of rules. It doesn't have to be outside rules, but they stick to it. But they seem to be anxious people. Chili, like sweets, Eastern people, they like sweets a lot. They have trouble with their low back or constipation. And that worse at 2 to 4, I don't know where that comes from. I guess that's the adrenal time. Everyone knows the circadian rhythm of the organs. But it's very useful. If we don't get to 2 to 4 aggravation, I would consider all the other remedies that you mentioned. Possible.
I really like that parking lot example.
You know, it's rules, and that's either wrong or right, like you said, black or white. For them,
Yep. Yeah, like that person that I see too, they're like, that's not the way we were raised. How can they do that? That's not the way we were raised. We were raised to know this and this, to do it this way. And that's just the way it is. Yeah, I will say cats don't follow the rules. So cats follow their rules. I mean, you know, I'm like, Jimmy, you cannot come up on the counter when I'm cooking. And I keep taking him off and taking him off and taking him off and taking him off. No, it does not work. Now that he's had calicarb and 1M more than once, I can say, don't even. He's looking at me from the chair and I'm like, don't even come up here. And then he won't. But before that, no. So cats are a little different that way. They're like, I want your food and I'm gonna take it. And same with that little dog, Coco. Oh my gosh, she didn't care what you thought. She's like, I'm gonna do what I want. I'm gonna take your sock and I'm gonna run in the other room with it. And you're going to chase me. So I would say in animals, it might look a little more hard-headed.
So Jody, the thing that I can't see, like I don't use a lot of calicarb, and it could be because I miss it when I see it, or it could be because none ever arrived on my doorstep yet. But what happens in a calicarb individual when they're doing that somewhat dictatorial sort of behavior and you don't want to play? So like the description you just had, you know, I don't care. I'm going to take this sock and I'm going to run away and you're going to chase me. And what happens if you just don't chase them?
He doesn't really want, okay, so I'll say they don't, oh, the dog, right? The dog, if she would get mad. She would get mad. She'd be like, no,
she would
I have
sulk.
this.
She would sulk, or she would come back and kind of bait you puppy play again, or she bite you in the ankles, or like like the things that you've been
Yeah, there's
describing
no
with
sign.
this. But the things that you've been describing with these Cali carb cases seem to involve compliance with the humans in the equation. And what happens if the humans just don't comply or don't engage?
They don't give up.
Okay.
They don't give up. They don't sulk. They're going to be like, no, you do this. No, this is what we're doing. We are doing this. We are doing this. Hello, we're doing this. Now, if they're too sick, like if the asthma is really bad and they can't function, they're not even
Yeah,
going
no,
to.
that's
Right.
not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like these demanding behaviors, crawling in the stove, biting people's ankles, running away with things, force play, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, they have strong feelings about it, and they don't give up. This is how you do it. This is what we're doing. This is what we do. We do this. Hello, are you not paying attention to me? Why are you, they don't care why you're not paying attention to them. They're just like, hey, 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 hey. And like the dog, the first dog, the old dog, Kinga, the
Yeah,
almost 7, if she's barking at and when she barks, it's 2 to 4 a.m. If she's barking at 2 to 4 a.m., she's not going to give up until you come out there, you pat her, and then you lay down on the couch in the living room where she is. She's not going to stop.
Interesting.
It's a strong opinions, and this is the way it is, and this is just the way it is. You come out here now. Attitudinal, you might say. Strong opinions would be a nicer way to say it.
Yeah, and I often, a question that I use a lot of times with my clients, and also whether it's animal cases or human cases, is what happens, what do they do next? Like the dog that wants to attack you, and you discipline them or don't discipline them, and well, what happens when the human in the equation does this? What happens if you don't um, if you correct them, or if in these cases you don't comply to their demands, like, yeah.
Right. They just keep doing it. They just keep doing it. It doesn't matter what you do unless you tell them like, thanks, you're, like with my cat, if he brings me the toy because I did something for him and he's paying me back, and I just tell him, hey, thanks, thank you so much, that was so kind of you, and I love him up and stuff, and he's like, yeah, that's right. Yep,
Yeah,
you're
because
right.
that's a different dynamic, right? Like thanking you for paying him back is different than the dictatorial, domineering, despotic kind of thing. Yeah, it's curious to just explore those
And he does
motivation
that.
things.
He only does that with me. So they'll do that with the person they love the most, or maybe the person that really gives them the most love, maybe. If you do something nice for them, I mean, they are grateful for you doing something nice for them, but if they want something, they're not going to give up.
Yeah, I've got some notes to myself about your case, your example, for example, about the mini differential that you did sort of between lachesis and Kaylee Carb, like how they respond to their treasures, right? Like lachesis would guard them and be the jealousy kind of thing versus not. And the other remedy that I have to just do a little differential materia medica is the lycopodium, because I see a lot of the things that you're describing in
Yes.
lycopodium cases, like that hierarchialness, that they have a preference, or either a preference for, an aversion to, or they don't listen to a particular person in the house, and that's sort of also that, in a nutshell, that sort of dictatorial, domineering, despotic kind of demanding this behavior. And I also look, and I haven't really studied Cali Carb with this in mind. I mean, there's a lot of rabies miasm or influence of rabies vaccine in that. Um, I see that in a lot of cases, but both in the first case that you presented, but also in some of these, some of these animals, sort of the monomaniacal behaviors and some of the physical symptoms and stuff too.
That is, wow, that's a great observation. I love that. And obviously, as you well know, we have lots of that in our companion animals. And this is not, it's not a remedy, and maybe I've just missed it, but it is not a remedy I've given to a horse. And they get rabies vaccines too.
Yeah, and
Definitely.
I'm just thinking back about that. I'm just trying to think about any cases that I've prescribed it with, but also, thinking about your bear dog, your very first case. A lot of the presentations that he's showing are common. That's common suite of presentations that we see in either his generation, like that dog got a rabies vaccine and this happened, or multi-generation rabies vaccines, and also, kind of looking at it as the culmination. And yeah, I know we do a lot more genetic testing. I mean, that was not available to me or my colleagues in my earlier career. We just didn't have that. The UC Davis services were, a twinkle in somebody's eye, hardly. But when we look at how we see deepening of disease patterns through the generations because of treatment and, all the reasons that we see that. And then now suddenly we have a suite of symptoms that never had a genetic, it wasn't in the genetic markers. And now we have a suite of symptoms that are now in the genetic markers, and also the ability, and we've seen this through the years with homeopathic care. We have genetic type diseases that we treat with the dynamic medicine, and the articulation of that disease is relatively more superficial. Everything from intellectual capacities to other physical things. I think about like trisomy 21 patients that have been treated with homeopathic care and that sort of stuff. That the genetics are still there. We see it in animal stuff too. The genetics are still there, but the articulation is relatively less severe, relatively more superficial. And so I think when we look at these things that can move out of that, also looking at things that situations that over the years can move into that, and that deepening disease that we see in breeds and in species. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that is such a good point. And you know what? I was just thinking about what you'd said about lycopodium and Cali Carb before too. The big difference between those two, because they do kind of have similar time frames too. They have that 3 to 4 or 3 to 5 time, or 2 to 4 time, AM or PM issues, and all the gut issues.
Evening through the night, right? Yeah.
But the one thing that's really different is Cali Carb is confident. And lycopodium isn't. If you look underneath, they're really not. They're a bully because
they can be bullyish. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that's kind of the difference here. And my cat has no lack of confidence, and none of these animals have any lack of confidence.
Or at least false confidence, right?
Right. It's not a false confidence. This is a true confidence. They just like, this is the way it is. Whereas lycopodium can be like, I'm going to bully you, but I'm only going to bully those that I can bully.
Right. Exactly so. Like those lycopodium horses, they'll always test you. If you step up and get on them and they've never met you before, they're going to try and run away or go into the fence line or through the trees or something. And, the question for me with that is, what do they do when the rider corrects them? Oh, they straighten up and fly right. Then, that would potentially be a bean in the lycopodium jar, so to speak.
Right. And then they might have that stage fright thing too, where like they can't perform. They're afraid to perform. They're afraid before a performance, but when they do it, they're fine. But Cali doesn't really have that. They're kind of like, nope, this is what we're doing. We don't even worry about things. We're just there. We do them. That's that.
Yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Well, once again, Dr. Jody Bierman, thank you so much. Wonderful presentation. How about a round of applause for Dr. Bierman? I always learn a lot, especially those tips on Cali Carb were just wonderful. In just the last couple seconds before we close, I had a couple questions. One was, being a dermatologist, I have to ask this. So you said that horses do sweat. Where do they sweat? All over their like body?
Yeah, they sweat all over, but anhydrosis is a huge deal in horses.
They don't
Really?
sweat. They don't sweat on their feet, though. Well,
Oh,
you can see diaphoretic hooves in horses. That's another kind of one of those extrapolative things. But like a dog will sweat on his feet. A horse won't sweat on their feet. They sweat on their
Yes.
furred area.
So if a horse has anhydrosis, would homeopathy have you
Oh, yeah.
ever helped them?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Yes.
That's wonderful.
And then the pattern of sweat, you can use those same rubrics that you would for humans for patterns of sweat. They only sweat on their neck, they only sweat on their chest. I use those rubrics a lot for horses for
Same here.
helping.
And also, sweating, you can do some both physical stuff like certain patterns, but also certain situations. It could be without exertion, it could be with exertion, it could be in the heat, it could be, they don't sweat when you expect them to sweat. It could be, anticipating, ailments, anticipating, and those kinds of things.
And I always ask if the barn manager is around, I love it when the barn manager is around. Because then I'm like, does this horse sweat more than other horses? Does this horse sweat less than other horses? That's so nice to find out.
I have a comment from Minaj saying that some of the skills used in treating animals may also be useful in treating human patients with special needs like autism, Down syndrome, and the like.
Totally. You know what?
Yeah.
I went to a Pierre Fontaine lecture. He's that autism whisperer in New York. And something that he said really helped me with my animal patients. He said, ask the people if they could speak, what would they say? So I say that to my clients all the time with their animals.
I say that all the time. And the thing that I always ask somebody at the end of a full anamnesis is we get to the end and, all the ends are tidied up and you've done the physical exam and over the phone if you're doing it that way and everything. And I always ask them to describe, just describe them and then don't say anything. And that'll give an issue. I've always said and have been known for saying, like doing veterinary homeopathy is, pediatrics with fur sometimes.
Totally. And I do the same thing. Like, who are they? Tell me who they are. Yeah.
And it's hard to, like, some people really want to anthropomorphize and other people, the tendency with small animal folks is, yeah, they do that. And, sometimes that's speculative and sometimes it can be really revealing.
Thank you very much. And just one last question. This one's for Dr. Fior. Tim, just one question before we wrap it up. You said that Dr. Andre Shane's new book on leukoplakia is coming out. Can we buy it? Where can we buy it?
It's not available yet.
Not available yet.
Editing, but then there's 26 appendices that have to be edited.
Oh, okay. So it might be a little while.
A few months.
A few months at least. Okay. Well, I'll definitely buy one.
But it's an amazing book. It shows how Hahnemann was a genius. Look at the intermittent fever, look at Collins and Medica, and say that Cinchona can only be useful for certain types of intermittent fever. You have to think his life. I mean, he came up with the concept of homeopathy. Without him, there wouldn't be homeopathy. But Liebe, after Hahnemann, because what Hahnemann did was hard, everyone tried to get a shortcut, and Liebe was the one who defended pure
homeopathy, and that's why it's still alive today. Without it, homeopathy,
I'll
it would
definitely-
have gone, you know, oh, quick, fast, just start on this disease, quick, don't feel potencies, blah, blah, blah. It wouldn't exist. It would
Hey,
be
Bob,
gone.
could you share with us again what that book is, please?
Let's
The
see.
best of Lipe.
The Best of Lippe, Lippe. So
Yeah, I know
obviously,
the thing.
the new book is going to be called The Best of Lippe, 10 chapters and a bunch of appendices. They're still being edited by Dr. Fior, but at least perhaps in a few months it'll be ready. So
Perfect.
you know, our next meeting is going to be September. So what do you think? Maybe by September?
Maybe.
Maybe. Good. So that
Hey,
segues into the
And
last.
the
Oh,
other
go ahead.
thing before you guys go, the Introducing Homeopathy movie was premiered at the joint homeopathic meeting in Reston last month, and it's also available. They're doing a screening the end of May to May 31st to June 3rd. It's a $25 ticket. My understanding is you get access to the movie for that whole time, and it is absolutely the best movie that I have ever seen on homeopathy, ever. It's
Wow.
absolutely a stunningly beautiful thing. That's what Jody and I were talking about, when y'all joined the meeting. But if you've not seen it, I would encourage you to see it. If you have seen it, it might be a good opportunity to share it with other people. They're in discussion now to, doing some. Maybe Morgan Freeman has, going to do the narration again, and they're talking about getting it on Netflix and stuff. But it's a tremendous, beautiful film.
Wow, thanks for the pros on that, because I know I've heard about it, but I haven't seen it. I've seen other movies on homeopathy, but I'm really looking forward to seeing this one then. Thanks for the tip.
Yeah, I can send you that by private email if you want to.
Yeah,
You're,
please do.
it's a stunningly beautiful film.
And my patient that's in it is just wonderful.
Wow.
I'm
All
not as
right.
excited, but my dog patient is quite wonderful.
So I guess that's it until September. Our next meeting for the joint Illinois Homeopathic Medical Association Academy of Veterinary Homeopathy will be Saturday, September 21st at 10 o'clock. Do we know which DVM speaker yet, Jeff, or you guys? Because I don't have it down yet. I'm sure Jeff will let me know real soon. From our standpoint, we're going to have Dr. Mitch Fleischer. He's a DHT human person for homeopathy. We're really looking forward to Dr. Fleischer. He's going to be speaking actually on the homeopathic skincare regimen that he does in his office, which is, being a dermatologist, I think that's going to be fabulous. And then we're going to have a really good DVM speaker too. So have a great summer, and thanks for now.
See you guys.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Yes, Tim, I think I know how to turn it on. I'm looking here, but I think it's this one.